The girl woke up early in the morning, pulled herself up, sat up on the bed, and noticed that somehow, strangely, her arms were much smaller. The girl's first thought was that she had entered another world. The girl looked around. She realized that her entire bedroom and even her closet was exactly the same as the room she had lived in as a child. The girl was overcome by a strange doubt. She guessed where she was, and how old she was. But she decided to check when she looked at her hands and saw the impact marks. Even the marks from Grandpa's daily beatings are the same. It made sense to her. About being forever in the most painful stage of her life. You could even call it hell. She didn't think she'd enter the next world with the appearance of this particular period. She could, of course, free herself from this cramped room if she became an heiress. But apparently it's not that easy. And why was it burned because of some head of household place? The girl was immediately overcome with memories of being held by two guards while she screamed, "Help, father! She didn't kill Fiona!" In the end, she couldn't help but be free from this room, not to be happy. If this place was her second life and not the netherworld, she wouldn't live this way this time, though she wondered if she'd ever had a morning as peaceful as today. The girl fell asleep again in her thoughts and musings. As if through her dream she heard someone calling her, and as she began to wake up, she heard her name distinctly called, saying, "Lady, wake up!" It was her maid Cara, who was trying to wake Letitia. Letitia rolled over from one side to the other and said, "Cara." The maid answered her, "How can you sleep through dinner? The head of the maids scolded her." Letitia asked, "Do they serve food in the netherworld too?" The maid became indignant and said, "What are you talking about?" Letitia froze for a moment when she saw her maid. The maiden asked, "Why are you so dumbfounded? The priest is coming tomorrow." Letitia interjected, "A priest? Why a priest?" The maid replied, "Why? The priest will come to persuade you, since you insisted that you could not forgive the former duke." Also, the maid said, "This is the second time Priest Gamal has come to visit the lady. Do you know how hard it is for him to use and clean this dilapidated room every time?" Letitia wondered. It wasn't just the dilapidated attic room that was still the same. The same events that had happened to her the summer she was 16 were happening now. Letitia Manor. One day in her 16th year, the former Duke of Manor, Letitia's grandfather, was in a dying state due to illness. He believed in the great saint. Whenever she was unable to control her anger, he would raise his hand against her. But too late, he began to fear the consequences of breaking the great saint's commandments. Letitia said, "Do not harm young children or weak animals. If you break the commandment, your soul will burn until it is at the very end of hell, in a deep pit." The maid replied, Yes, it is the commandment that the former duke feared the most." Letitia thought, that's why he called a priest from the Central Religious Society. Because if he who is facing death has not yet gone to hell, he can only be saved by her forgiveness. Letitia wondered if this wasn't another world. Could she be dreaming this whole thing? Maybe not. Letitia said to the maid Cara, "Prepare clean clothes for going out that she can wear tomorrow." The maid asked, "Are you going for a walk?" The maid was indignant. "Wait a minute! But tomorrow is not the day your grandfather will let you do this. Don't you know how much trouble you'll cause if you abscond somewhere?" Letitia asked. "What will happen?" The maid started yelling at her again, and the knights and heads of the maids would only scold her if you act so selfishly. Letitia said indignantly, "Maybe I should also promise her that she will never behave selfishly from now on." The maid was startled and blushed. What? What is this? Oh my, did you eat something weird by any chance?" Then Letitia finally freaked out and said, "If the maid wants her to stay sane when she eats dog food that consists of leftovers from what her father and Philippe ate?" The maid asked indignantly again, "What do you intend to say now? Why are you suddenly behaving like this?" Letitia replied, "Why only now? You should have done it earlier." The girl said, "Cara, she's above you in status. Even though she is entrusted with the responsibility for her, does she really think she is her master?" The maid, Cara, said, "No." Lowering her head, she knelt down and added, "I'm sorry. She's done something she had no right to do." There are two steps to foster loyalty in monarchism. The first is to make it clear who is superior. Second, if the interlocutor obeys, reward him. Since man is a social animal, his attitude towards you will change depending on how you are treated by the people around you. Therefore, in order to receive proper treatment from the ducal servants, she first needs to correct the behavior of Cara, who is responsible for her. Letitia thought that when she was young, she didn't even know about such basic things, so she lived her life being disrespected. She asked the maid if Cara understood, then the situation was forgotten. The maid asked, "Will the lady personally go to see the priest?" Letitia replied, "Cara just needs to know that what she is so worried about won't happen. It's not like she can keep the priest waiting every time, so she decided to meet with him in secret." The girl said, "Yes, escort the priest Gamal to the guest room tomorrow, and Cara, don't forget to prepare clean clothes for the exit. As Duke Maynard's daughter, it's not like she can't show up in pajama attire every time in front of the priest." The maid said okay, she understood, she'll do it. Letitia also asked for new paper and to go out quickly. The maid said to her, "Very well." When the maid left, Letitia sat down at the table, took pen and paper, and began to sketch her thoughts. How had she managed to start living again? If it was not a dream, only one thing was possible. When she was a successor. She read about it. In the book of Abraham the Great, the sage and founder of the Magic Tower, a phenomenon called a miracle is described. The ancient book of Hebron speaks of two basic ways to turn back time. The first is to use the sacredness, and the second is to use the power of the devil to desecrate holy relics. Both require a sacred relic, but the records were erased 500 years ago after the ancient book was discovered. It remains a mystery what these holy relics are, what they are called, and where they are buried. The only thing that is certain is the date of the ceremony. New Year's Eve, the last day of December, ending the whole year. As soon as the annular eclipse begins at the offering of the sacrifice at the altar of the great saint, a miracle will occur that will turn back time. The girl writes it all down, on paper. She remembered that she didn't die on New Year's Eve. The 1st of June, when the sun created by the great saint is overshadowed by the golden moon created by the devil, Iblis time. The devil-worshipping Nirad family considers Iblis New Year's Eve a holiday. Letitia remembered that Eli Nirad. Why didn't he go to the feast but came to her execution ceremony? If she really did go back in time, what happened to Eli who saved her? She has a lot of questions for him. Why did he shoot an arrow at her? Why save her? Why did he pray for her repose? Letitia wondered if she could face him in his current guise. The beginning of the building of the magic tower. Only two great beings are mentioned in the book of Hebron by the great sage Abraham. The great Saint Hildegard, who rules the axis of time. The very first devil Iblis, who possesses 7 names and the power of the 7 sins. There yet existed one who marked the time by which the saint reigned. To borrow the name of the great devil Iblis, then even a person who does not possess the holiness that is considered Hildegard's blessing will be able to turn back time. After writing it all down on paper, Letitia realized that this way of changing time from the future to the past is called a return. At that time, Eli Nirvad was the master of the magic tower, that is, the object of lust and fear, and today is another 7 years to the day of her death. If she's only a 16-year-old duchess, then that means Eli is now no more than 19 years old, and is not the younger Marquis of Nirvad. Letitia thought of a duchess from the Holy Family, who worships only the great Saint Hildegard, facing the son of Nirvad. That way Letitia can find out a lot of pitfalls about this family. That's why she'll be cast out of the family if she isn't. Letitia walked to the window, looking out at the sun. Then the girl's memories from her past life immediately flashed. What people called her a dirty, illegitimate child. Filthy cunt, bound in Aletta's blood. The men shouted to her, and Letitia, clutching her mother, tried to hold on lest she be pulled away from her. The guards were dragging Letitia to her execution. People kept shouting, "Even if she dies, she won't be able to bear the name of the Maynard family." Now she won't live a life that looks like a dirty curtain hanging on a hook. Even if she is kicked or banished, she is sure to meet Eli Nirvad. Letitia said, "Grace for grace, and vengeance for the enemy." The next morning the maid Cara runs up the steps to the attic and shouts, "Lady Letitia, are you loitering again? How long will you keep the priest waiting?" Opening the door, a maid ran into Letitia's room. When the maid ran in, she saw Letitia standing fully prepared to meet the priest. "Letitia said she was late, Cara, and she's just now getting here." The maid, when she saw that Letitia was fully prepared, said, Pardon me, she's come to escort you, lady. Priest Gamel is waiting in the guest room. Letitia went to the reception room where the priest was already waiting for her. He said, Your ladyship, you have come early today, and rose to greet her. It was the priest Gamal from the Central Religious Society. Letitia came into the room and said that she always made the priest wait for her. The priest said it was okay. She might even try to hide to avoid him. After all, how much did the former duke torment his granddaughter, the Duchess? Letitia replied, Since you are from the Central Religious Society, she sees, you understand her well. Priest Gamal gave an indulgence to Baron Mamonto, who was involved in the slave trade of young boys. Most people who know this truth consider the priest an ally of Baron Mamonto, and Letitia's grandfather gave this man gold coins for his own salvation. Just like in his past life, he will start using insults and brainwashing to get her forgiveness from now on. Letitia asked the priest if she could ask one question. The priest replied, Sure, ask him whatever you want and whenever you want. Then Letitia asked Knight Faber to step away from his post for a while. Knight Faber replied that, Lady, I'm sorry, but he can't leave you alone with a stranger. Letitia said that she did not want the Lord to hear her confession to the priest. Knight Faber thought, Is it because there's no priest here to confess to? She's going to do it to that bastard? All right, Faber said, just before you go, he'll give you one thing. The girl said, That's then. The knight replied, This guest room has silence magic, so if there's a problem, he won't be able to deal with it right away, and handed her the watch. If you scroll the hand of the clock, he'll get a danger signal. And also, if you feel any strange hints, use this thing. Then Letitia realized that Lord Faber seemed to know about the rumors about Priest Gamal. She was worried that she would have to get rid of some people, if necessary, because everyone in the family treated her disrespectfully. She thought he was one of the slackers who didn't protect properly, but she could see he had a bit of a conscience. Then, as Knight Faber stepped aside, he said, Warns the priest, remember that the lady is of Manor's origin. When the knight left, the priest said, Is this naughty brat an escort? It would be better to replace him. Letitia replied that he was not that obedient, but quite loyal. Then she asked again, May I ask my question? And continued, After all, the great saint gave the admonition, not to hate a man even if you hate his sin, right? The priest replied, Correct. He said, So it would be best for the Duchess to forgive her grandfather. If the rumor spreads that the Duchess, who carries on her back the power of the sanctity of manners, has not forgiven her own grandfather, who will serve and respect her, suffering and loneliness will follow you all your life. To fail to forgive the former duke is like failing to save yourself. The priest said, So take his hands now, and let us go and see your grandfather, if you will say you have forgiven him. But he was interrupted by Letitia, the priest said. If all of a sudden she forgave him her grandfather, would she be a nasty bitch? Letitia laughed and said, If she doesn't forgive him, even if she goes to hell for it, what will he do? The priest shouted, What is she talking about? So much so that he jumped up from his chair. Letitia replied, Why? Did she say something wrong or incorrect? I mean, he forgave the person who was in the slave trade, even if she becomes a horrible bitch. Could just throw money at him, and everything would be fine, couldn't it? The priest got up from his chair and began to shout, You are crazy to speak such nonsense to a priest so fearlessly. The priest kept shouting, There, wench, so she made a deal with the devil, evil devil. He made a deal with him that forbade her to forgive her grandfather. Letitia said nothing to him, she thought rightly. Then the girl decided to tease. She said yes, and put the cup aside from which she had been drinking tea during the conversation, and replied that she, too, thought she was firmly in the grip of an evil spirit. After these words, the girl knew one thing: the pattern of action of such men is simple. She began to climb on the table, and she began to move slowly across the table, saying to the priest these words, for she had been tormented by her grandfather's cruelty for a long time. So he probably thought it would be more effective to yell and raise his hand at her than to admonish and scold her with words. Also, Letitia said, the fearful young Duchess cannot easily lean on and confide in other people. His sins are not revealed to the whole world. That's why he doesn't even have to get an indulgence. Priest who swore to follow the teachings of the great saint because of them coins. The priest began to shout, The devil has gotten into her! The devil! In response, Letitia shouted at him, I'd rather make a deal with the devil than listen to the words of a bastard like him. and she grabbed him by the collar. Then the priest said, "Listen to him carefully, Duchess. If you do not forgive your grandfather, your mother, who is now in heaven, will drag you down into the deep pit of hell." If he, the priest, prayed about it, it would happen. Letitia thought he had finally said it. The priest continued, "Says the disrespectful creature who doesn't even know the grace he's reaping. A bitch who can't even pray for the repose of her parent's soul. She used to forgive her grandfather because of those words. She, who couldn't even be there for her mother when she was near death, prayed for Grandpa's peaceful death because she was scared to death. But now the situation is quite different. Letitia, grabbing the priest's collar, told him that a female child must be submissive, able to yield and be obedient to the adults and men in charge of the family. The priest shouted, "That's right, he's glad you've realized your ignorance, at least for now," and his hand reached into his pocket for his dagger. When the priest pulled out his dagger, Letitia was able to intercept it from the priest, taking it in her hands. She said what was left of her life as a pretty girl, swinging that dagger at the priest. After her right to forgive was taken away from her, she couldn't even be bothered to see her grandfather. She doesn't care anymore, even if there is a hell. "She's going to send Grandpa to the bottom of the barrel with you, priest," the priest said. "There you go, you crazy wretch. What has she done?" She did not prick the priest with that dagger, but herself, and she bled. "Letitia said you with that fat tongue of yours." He, the priest, said her mother would drag her to hell. The priest said she was out of her mind. "We have to get out of here somehow." Letizia is sitting on the floor, covered in blood and coughing. The priest whispers that he didn't do it. It's not his fault, thinking about what he should do. The priest said, "Oh, his dagger, she has it, give him back his dagger." At that moment, Knight Faber runs into the room, and what does he see? The priest, bent over the lady, is holding a bloody dagger, and the lady is covered in blood. The priest started yelling right away that wait a minute, he didn't do it. But Faber didn't care. He slapped him and told him to shut up. A great many guards rushed up to Letitia at once. Some ran into the room to seize the priest, while others ran up to the lady asking how she was, and calling for the doctor's help. She thought that no one would help her, a bastard child. That there was no one in this mansion who would take her side. The head of the Manor family, Duke Guyan, was a cruel man. But the rumors that he had no interest in his daughter and witnessed her death is a different matter. Duchess of the Holy Family. The truth that she was subjected to death by a priest hired by her grandfather must not be known to the public. Duke Guyan, who values his family's reputation, will probably decide to get rid of Priest Gamal to keep the matter quiet. But if attacking the Duchess is the same as attacking Duke Manor himself, so the priest trying to hurt her is a serious matter, even though she's half Duchess. Knight Faber shouted, "Ladies, regain consciousness." Thanks to him, the incident was easily resolved. At the same time, about 2 days away from the duchy, the head of the Duke Manor family, Guyan Manor, was on a hunting trip. Suddenly he saw an eagle in the sky. The eagle had a piece of paper in its beak. It was their eagle from the duchy. An eagle perched on the Duke's shoulder with a letter in its beak. The Duke took the letter and said that the letter came from the mansion. As he began to read it, his face changed and his mood soured. Something was wrong. He asked his guide, "How long will it take to arrive in the duchy?" The guide told him that if you crossed through the forest, it would be another 2 days. Then he said that they would ride without interruption and arrive at the mansion within tomorrow. The horsemen who knighted the Duke said that they didn't know anything had happened, did they? The Duke said no objections. "We leave now." The knights shouted, "Accepted," and they set off. A couple days later in the morning, Letitia came to her senses. She saw that it was an unfamiliar place. She was not in her room. Out of habit, she tried to sit up on the bed, but she developed a sharp pain. A girl came into the room. She said, "Lady, you see, you're awake." That girl was the healer Glands. She said she was bleeding profusely, so you were laid up for about 2 days. You'll need about another half a month of good rest to recover. Letitia thought it had been so long already. By the way, she assumed her father would take care of their family's reputation. Was he really the one who sent the Glantz family doctor? Letitia asked if Gamal had consecrated. The healer says he is locked up in an underground prison. Stubbornly asks to contact the Central Religious Society, for which he is now being beaten, causing him to be in a thoughtless state. Faber, who was in charge of your defense back then, and the knights who were defending the outer wall of the mansion that day were also driven to prison. And about Faber, who stood in defense of the lady, He was fired, the healer said. According to the Templar decision of the third squad, he left his seat during the priest's attack, which is rather suspicious. Any deal with Priest Gamal is being investigated. To prevent the lady from messing with situations like this from now on, the knights have been waiting outside your door since yesterday. Letitia asked, "Did they raise the number of guards?" The healer replied, "Yes, lady. The Duke said one knight was not enough, so they introduced 5 this time." Letitia thought, so many. In her previous life, she had been assigned 5 guards only after becoming the successor. She was the one who asked Faber to leave his post. Yet it was illogical. The Manor family included only 3 types of knights: the Knights Templar. Red Knights Templar from the first unit that defended the encirclement of the Duke of Guyana. Green Knights Templar squad, 2 Green Knights Templar who optimized missions, and the Grey Knights Templar who were made up of commoners. To strengthen the ladies' guard, knights from the second squad were added. The healer said that the list had been selected by the main delegation in accordance with the Duke's will, so that the lady could have peace of mind. Letitia asked, "Father? Really?" Letitia said that the head of the delegation who selected the knights for her case was not the head of the first squad by chance. The healer replied to her that it was known that he was the head of the second squad. Letitia thought that the head of the first squad, Count Eura, they would meet someday. Count Eura was Letitia's fencing teacher, and at this point in life, someone framed Letitia and killed Lady Fiona. But everyone thought that Letitia did it because she was also sitting over Lady Fiona's body and had a dagger in her hands, just like the priest that Letitia had framed. Lady Fiona's father was her teacher. Therefore, Letitia must certainly fix it in this life. Fiona will not die. The healer said that word had also been passed on that his lordship was about to return from the imperial palace in a hurry. He also asked if you were badly hurt, lady. She contacted him via letter, but he insisted that he had to see you with his own eyes. Letitia asked, "But father was supposed to be off to solve the food problem in the domain." The healer replied, "Yes, that's right." The healer said, "So you are aware of this?" Letitia replied, "Of course." She thought about the fact that she had been involved in exactly the same events in her past life. A few days before the girl's death, Duke Guyan went to the imperial palace. It was just a meeting for the sake of meaningless discussions, but the emperor continuously summoned Duke Guyan. Letitia said, "Winter reigns for 6 months in winter's domain and summer for 6 months, so it's hard to grow crops there." The healer laughed and said, "Most importantly, the reason is that they were forced to seek outside help, because for 50 years, winter has continued in winter's domain. There were not many families who could provide food for winter, where the endless winters continued. The hierarchy of the imperial family. 50 years ago, the 3 families of the duchy and the imperial family began to provide food for the north. Exactly 10 years ago, they were discussing how long they could continue to do so. Golden family of the east, Astavan. The head of the eastern family, Astavanov, disappeared without leaving an heir. The Nirad family who worshipped the western devil. The head of the Nirvad family was half insane, so he refused to cooperate. And the sacred family of the south, Letitia's Manor family. The physician said that His Majesty is still turning his attention to Countess Winter, the northern monarchy. Isn't that gratifying? But he had no other choice. If the Northmen under Countess Winter's command didn't prevent the invasion of the devilish monsters, they would still be turned into meat from the outside forces. The glands healer said, "Goodness, she's been sitting too long. Can she now go and do some important studying?" Letitia interjected, "Study?" The girl looked at the healer and remembered the man's eye. She saw, as in her past life, she had a fascination with studying the human body. The healer smiled and said that just the priest Gamal was in prison. The religious society must have replied that they could deal with him as they saw fit, and without harming the man who was causing trouble. Letitia said, "You may go. Give the medicine to Kari, who is in the corridor." The healer said, "Okay, she understood you." Before the healer left, Letitia said she had one request. Have them release Lord Faber and tell them that she is rescinding his dismissal as a knight, and she will speak to her father personally. The next day the Duke's butler arrived at the mansion, immediately asked them to prepare water for washing, but the Duke replied, "No need." Then the butler asked, "In that case, let's prepare the food first." The Duke interrupted him and asked where Letitia was. The butler began to speak indistinctly. Then the Duke asked again where Letitia was. The Duke heard the report that her life was not threatened and she was able to pass the critical moment. What happened to her? The butler replied, "The lady has had plenty of rest since beginning her rehabilitation with the glands healer, and is now in the mansion's library." Letitia found the books she needed. She left the library and went to her father's study, saying that she had heard that her father was looking for her. The Duke replied, "Right." Then Letitia said that the healer glance had informed her of something that interested him greatly. Had she not suffered much, however? The Duke replied that, "Are there any fathers who do not ask such a thing when their daughter is wounded?" The Duke asked the knight's guards to leave them alone. The knight said they obeyed and left the study. Then her father decided to ask what had happened that day. The girl answered him with what you heard from the family doctor, father. Her father, taking the book about Letitia which she had taken to read, said he did not care for the healer's report. He now asked her to tell with her own mouth what had happened that day. Looking at the book, he said, "Is this book really the White Queen?" Letitia thought that the man who had not listened to the injustice that had happened to his daughter, who was on the verge of death, had decided to build himself up as a parent. Then the girl decided to reply that she had not told him, but she had had a private conversation with the priest Gamal. And during the conversation, he intimidated her into forgiving her grandfather. He said that she, the Duchess of Manners, must not become a bad wench. Father asked, "So did she forgive her grandfather?" Letitia replied, "No, father. Even if the priest slit her throat, she wouldn't be able to forgive her grandfather." Just as Letitia said that even if her father condemned her choice, the answer would remain the same. The Duke asked why she thought he would judge her. The girl answered because all this time her father had always listened to her grandfather's wishes, but not to his daughter's, even if those wishes violated the authority of the head of the family. A small digression on the fact that within every power system there is a food chain. The current top predator of the Duchy of Manor is the current head of the family, Duke Guyan, and right below him is the past Duke Graham, who tries to meddle in everything, even though he has stepped down as head of the family. And the unique creature who could be bullied at will by a former duke who walked away from his title is Letitia, the young illegitimate daughter of the Duke of Guyana. But Letitia, who has been impotently tormented by her grandfather all this time, is right now throwing embers into the protracted title fight between the two men. Letitia felt a little upset at the words she had just said to her father. As her grandfather had ordered, he simply watched as he beat and insulted her. The girl said the priest threatened her that her mother would go to hell if she didn't forgive her grandfather. And her grandfather said he wouldn't put her name in the family registry even if a wench like her died. He said he'd take her life so she wouldn't forgive him and follow her mom to hell. She just couldn't forgive her grandfather for saying such words to her. The Duke took Letitia's hand and said, "But why didn't she tell him about it? If he was really turning a blind eye to her grandfather's arbitrary behavior, he should have asked him for help. He would have helped her. At least now he'd start paying attention." Asked Letitia's father, okay? Letitia thought that at last until now he had simply observed his grandfather's actions, but reacted immediately when the authority of the head of the family was mentioned. Besides, he was now speaking as if he would pay attention to it from now on, and that she should now thank him for it. Therefore, the girl replied to her father that she didn't have to. After all, she realized that she would not be moved by his petty words as having fallen for it again. She told her father not to change and to stay the way he is. Also, Letitia said that what happened next was just like the report you received, father. Letitia said she was adamant that she would never forgive her grandfather for anything, and the priest Gamal, who had earlier been paid for his work, threatened her with his dagger, causing her to be wounded. If a few attendants had been presented to her that day as usual, she would not have been hurt in the end. The Duke replied to her that he had been inattentive. Letitia said, "Perhaps." Duke told his daughter that her grandfather's funeral was being planned soon, but she didn't need to attend. Letitia asked him, "Is it because you don't recognize her as a daughter in the direct line of descent?" The Duke said no, for the sake of him taking responsibility for failing to protect her from her grandfather. Her father leaned over and kissed her cheek and told her in her ear that he was going to give her one gift. This gift is that her grandfather will die in exactly 2 days. This is to make her an heiress. Guyan Manor. He was already planning to kill her grandfather, but he lies, embellishing that he did it for the sake of her becoming an heiress. Father was constantly bristling because of the past head of the family, who even abandoned the authoritative place, could not get rid of regrets, and stuck firmly to father. Therefore, the father, for the sake of his own position, had been thinking about the grandfather's head for a long time. And so he finally finds the perfect moment when his fragile daughter admits that she won't forgive him. After all, he will be able to present long-awaited immorality under the guise of a gift for his daughter. Letitia said that even at this moment when she uses him, he is trying to use her. He was just a psycho, of course, but he was also a piece of trash. She should get out of that mansion soon. At least her life wouldn't be used in his plans. Letizia sits drinking tea. At that moment, her maid Cara asks her, "Lady, does this tea taste good to you?" Letitia replies, "It's fine." Letitia decided to ask Cara if she had heard that white wolves were being raised in Vintore, and that there was a wolf in their family too. The maid tensed up and became very frightened, as if she knew something. Letitia looked at her and realized too that Cara knew some information. She went on to say that a bird had hummed. The sweaters brought in a young white wolf for breeding, and this wolf tore up the body of a still-living priest and then ate him. The maid said that the priest had just had an accident. Letitia replied, "Yes, unlucky him. Who knew that the priest Grandpa liked would die so lowly?" The girl said, "Even a trained knight wouldn't be able to escape from the duchy's dungeon. It's a strange thing, isn't it? She thinks that this accident has greatly distressed her father. The priest should have gotten a just punishment, but he died like that. When he was found by the healer Glance and the maids, he had been torn apart by wolves." Healer Glance was very surprised. She asked the knights, was it true? Was that wretched priest really alive? Such a thing was also impossible. The knights replied that it was true. Collect his remains from the ground. It is believed he escaped from prison at dawn, and at that time, the wolf was rushing just this way. The healer asked, while he was alive, did he try to escape from them? Healer Glance thought that yes, there was only one person in this mansion who could plot such a thing. This case was definitely a Duke setup. Letitia takes a good look at what happened to the man who escaped from prison. Letitia replied to her father that she had known about it before. Herzog said the manor wolf is the top predator of the Piscine. Letitia interjected, "The top predator?" Father confirmed that yes. She said that she had heard that this breed was brought from the north. Her father asked, and Letitia continued, "The northern winter, a white wolf living on a snowy mountain, was kidnapped, after which it was bred with a southern wolf, correct?" Duke said that is correct, and she is well aware of that. Letitia said she heard it was an accomplishment of the Dutch Yvette. It all happened another 10 years ago. It is said that when the white wolf of winter appears, the wolf Monner, who was named King of the South after breeding, was eventually eaten. Laughing, the Duke said, "That's right, it is. But why would that white wolf Winter come all the way out here?" He sees Letitia. She is intensely interested in the wolf who is about to starve to death for lack of food. Teresa Winter, the northern monarch. They call her the iron-blooded countess. Letitia remembered her father's words of a wolf who would soon starve to death. The girl picked up a book called The White Queen. This book says that in the past, 3 creatures took root in Snow Mountain. The first is eternal ice. Ice Raiden, the great spirit of ice in the form of a white wolf. The second is Paradise Fire, the fiery Parviz, a fire spirit having blue eyes on his black fur. And the third is Zachariah, the golden dragon who watches over the spirits. People coveted the magical power that Zachariah possessed. As a result, the dragon was killed. Ice Raiden, who was following Zachariah, couldn't cope with the grief of losing his dragon, and then he went mad. Winter and Winter, started because of Raiden's madness, has not ended even after 50 years. If the golden dragon is resurrected, the curse will continue. Letitia said that the land where the White Wolf clan lives, summer will never return to her beautiful winter again. The White Queen is a boring fairy tale anyway. There wasn't even a copy of Hebron in the main library. It was just that the day her father had called her in, she had picked up some book in a hurry, and it turned out to be The White Queen. The maid Cara said, "Lady, actually, she has heard something about this book of fairy tales. When she was a child, she worked for the influential Rendell family. Her aunt worked as a servant for them for a long time, so she also stopped there to learn the job. The young daughter of the Rendell family often told stories related to books. Then the young Lady Rendell, oh no, Lady Jenny said the same thing as the lady is saying now. She added that she wondered who had written such a dull tale. Letitia said, "Wait, Jenny Rendell was only known for interpreting ancient books. The White Queen is an old book, but it came out 20 years ago, so you can't call it ancient." "Oh, and it doesn't require interpretation," Maid Cara said. "Yes, the Rendell family was best known for interpreting and restoring ancient books, but she remembers how angry they were when they heard that the request to adapt this tale came from a family they could not refuse." Letitia asked, "Whose family was it?" The maid began to whisper, "It's secret," but she had heard that this tale was written by the Countess of Winter. Letitia asked, "Countess Winter? You say the Countess, busy catching magical monsters and stopping invading outside forces, wrote this book?" Maid Cara said that she hadn't heard it personally from Countess Winter, but Lady Jenny had clearly said that the Countess wanted to meet a spirit mage, which was why she herself had written The White Queen. Letitia said, "And how effective would it be to write a fairy tale? Aren't such stories distorted?" Maid Cara said she thought so too, but she didn't write this book for adults. Thinks she did it for children, so she pondered some things. Maybe she wrote this tale for children because they, compared to adults, are more likely to have their abilities manifest one day. And so, to summarize, as Cara said, it was hard for children who don't know anything to realize their skills. Therefore, most children have often overlooked and lost their talents that have been evident since childhood. This is why the development of children's gifts could only be achieved when their abilities were noticed by adults, who then let the children know about their talents. This wasn't just happening to mages, but to spiritual ones too. Letitia was physically unable to use magic because of the peony disease. It was a rare disease whose magical power was so strong that it would eventually corrode the body and lead to a short life. She would get this disease again when she turned 21 years old. However, she's going to send her grandfather to the bottom of hell, because if that ability wasn't magic, then... Letitia said to the maid Cara, "Add a field trip to her schedule. Yes, ask father for permission. She needs to go to the central church. If she is unable to use magic, she will use a special skill. There's only one explanation for this. She has to see if she has the abilities of a spirit mage." The next morning there was a shout from the head of the maids. "Maria! Glance!" She had called for her a long time ago and she just now came in. "Stop being lazy. At least she knows Mr. Graham had several seizures while she was away." Physician Glanz replied that she had come late on purpose because she thought that you, Madam Head of Maids, would want to spend more time with the former Duke. "If you were feeling homesick," she apologized. The head of the maids screamed at her for saying such a thing. Glanz said you usually cared too much for him and thought she had no idea of your affection. "Well, go ahead and tell me. He had seizures during the night." Glanz said, "Mr. Graham, but the old man only lay down and called for Letitia." Healer Glanz laughed. "Even in this state, he's still looking for his granddaughter? What a tough old man he is." Healer Glanz took the syringe in her hands and brought it up to her arm to inject it into a vein, saying, "Okay, don't be a buka. Take the medicine prepared by the hands of a dirty commoner." The healer decided to play a joke and said, "Glod gulp. It's so good you're taking your medicine." And the syringe plunged the medicine deeper and deeper into the vein. Letitia's room. The maid led Letitia to the bed. The girl asked, "Was grandfather unwell last night? He had a critical moment, right?" And the maid Cara replied, "That's right, lady. According to the family doctor, today's prayers for the repose of his soul may be the last." Letitia immediately remembered her father's words as he leaned over and told her in her ear that her grandfather would die in exactly 2 days. "So today is the promised day," the maid Cara said. "It turns out the priestess is here to escort you." Going to the door and opening it, Letitia said it was too early. It was not yet the appointed time for the meeting. When the door was opened, the maid saw an older woman. She said that she was Navtis, the priestess of the central church. The woman said she had come because the former duke had summoned her. He said that her ladyship must say the last prayer for the repose. "She will personally escort the lady instead of where her grandfather is now arriving," said the Navtis woman, the priestess of the central church, Duchess Letitia Maynor. When the women went to the place where grandfather was now staying, Letitia thought, as she walked along the road, that earlier, the priest Gamal had already said the last prayer for repose. So she did not think a new priest would come. The girl asked, "Is your name Navdis? Your name should have sounded like your name in church," but she hadn't heard anything like that there. The priestess replied, "That's right. She was the first priestess. But more than years ago, after being excommunicated, her name was struck off the list." Letitia then asked, "If you were excommunicated, then that means you don't have the status of high priest now. Grandfather personally called you. Are you sure?" The woman said no. She has received a call from the church, so she's doing the work for a while. Since the priest Gamal died in an accident, she was assigned his tasks for a while. Letitia said about the lower aristocrats, she doesn't know. But if her grandfather was in a normal state of mind, he wouldn't have summoned an excommunicated high priestess. There must have been some mistake in the church. The priestess said, "Isn't it always like this in churches?" The priestess thought that she had grown up being constantly abused by her grandfather, the one that she was cautioned by the priestess summoned by her grandfather. Naturally, this young child is like a cat holding back its claws. This young child is like a cat holding up its claws. Then the woman priest decided to give her a present. She said, "Take this, your ladyship," and threw something into Letitia's hands. The girl asked, "What is it?" And the priestess replied, "It's a toy that the children in Vintori play with. It was a pebble her child was attached to, but she took it away from him." Letitia thought, "A thing from winter." The priestess said, "Please enter Mr. Graham's resting place." When Letitia turned around, the woman was gone, and she had disappeared somewhere. The girl wondered about the high priestess Navtis and why she had the stone from winter. Letitia walked into Grandpa's room and the head of the maids said, "You finally showed up?" Letitia asked, "Do you know how long Mr. Graham has been waiting for you? He sees it's only now that you've come to your senses. Luckily, he regained consciousness for a while. You can have simple conversations with him." Letitia replied, "Good, I'm glad." Letitia turned to the maid, Miriam, and the woman replied, "Yes, I'm listening." Letitia told the maid that she needed to speak to her grandfather alone. "Step outside, please." The maid replied, "Yes, I will." The second chance that came her way was a chance to undo something she regretted until the day she died. The grandfather called out to Letitia, raising his hand to her. He said that he had done many vicious things and wished to teach his son a lesson, because he could not accept the fact that he had met a commoner. But now he doesn't have long to live, so he asks to be forgiven. Letitia walked over to her grandfather, took his hands and said, "Grandpa, is that all you have to say?" she was asked by Letitia. Then he said, "Don't hurt little children and weak animals. If you break the commandments, you will burn in the deep pit at the very end of hell, until her soul is gone." These words were spoken by her grandfather. As Letitia spoke these words, she remembered every blow, every word her grandfather had said in her direction. Letitia prayed to the great saint, so God would not press him to her bosom. She asked her that there was no way you could ever be together with where her mother was staying. She prayed about dozens and hundreds of times. "So don't you dare think about going to heaven." The old man tried to say another word, "Letitia," calling her by name, but the girl said, "Why won't he go to heaven?" "Because it is where her mother rests. There's no room for a man like him there, so go on to the deep pit." When the priestess disappeared, in Letitia's opinion, she didn't disappear. She went to meet the Duke. Where is that man? Damn it! That was how she escorted the Duchess. So that was the end of her role as Navista's high priestess. It would be nice if she could steal the holy relic before facing Guyan at the next meeting. Duke Manor's office. The Duke said, "The relic that will stop winter. He's already told you he doesn't have one, Countess." The Countess asked, "Don't you have a holy relic that will at least weaken the power of the spirit, rather than completely destroy it?" His Majesty said, "You have Guyana, Bertha's smile." The Duke said, "I'm not sure. His Majesty is probably mistaken. Even if he had it, with the power of Bertha's relic, you won't be able to finish the winter." The Countess asked, "So he can't help them? When you used winter as a state border shield, asking them for a lot of things, so it's pretty rude of you." The Duke said, "Countess, did you not give them aid by preventing your people from starving to death?" The Countess, as she left, thought of them risking their lives to defend the North. And he boasts of helping them with food, though he himself owns the southern breadbasket. The Countess, hiding around a corner, saw Letitia. She thought his daughter seemed intelligent. Did he take her in? The Duchess's red eyes said her blood was mixed with Aletta's. Aleta included blood relatives who had been creating spirit mages for generations. Their purity was an object of fear. The obsession with pure and strong ancestry led to self-destruction. The creator of the Piscine Empire. When the coronation of the Duke of Piscine, who had previously been just an ordinary knight, took place, Aletta lost her spiritual power and land, her name and place. The Countess decided to steal this relic by making her way to the Duke's castle. As she walked down the corridor and put all the knights to sleep, she thought about the fact that eventually Aletta's blood began to be recognized as commoners, causing them to be treated worse than slaves. Though that had been a long time ago, still, the environment for their development wasn't normal. After cutting down another knight, she said, "I'm sorry, but get some sleep for a while." The Countess entered the Duke's study, went to one of the cabinets, and looked for Bertha's smile. She was scouring the shelves, saying, "Where did he stash it? Can he see it?" "Well, yeah, some precious holy relics are usually stored in an underground warehouse, so there must be some kind of secret lock here. She'd invaded someone else's home, and what if she came back empty-handed? I should have listened to what the butler said." The voice of past High Priestess Navdis, now a butler, rang out. "Your ladyship, although she lives as a butler now, she was a high priest in the church for a while, so she is knowledgeable about this. Bertha's smile may have been precious back then, but now that the spiritual magics have been killed, it is an unnecessary and useless holy relic. It was moved to the south building as a decoration." The Countess asked, "But this holy relic was created to confront spirit mages, wasn't it? And it has been said that she weakens the power the spirits wield. If she has it, perhaps they will be able to stop winter in winter at least for a while." The Countess remained on the carpet. She said that this relic was previously in the building to the south. Maybe it was moved to some underground warehouse during this time. Where is the hidden door that leads to the dungeon? Then she heard a voice say, "What are you looking for?" When she looked up, she saw Letitia in front of her. The girl said, "The High Priestess gave her a toy from Winter. She assumes that's where you're from?" She found it suspicious, so she immediately headed over here. "You came since you're looking for a holy relic, right?" The Countess replied, "Yes." She already thought that the Duchess was quite savvy, but she was too much for me to appreciate you. Letitia said, "So what relic are you looking for, priestess?" She doesn't know specifically, but take anything as recompense for the toy. The Countess said she was looking for Bertha's smile. Letitia replied, "That's how it is." Then Letitia said, "So surely Winter looking for a spirit mage who can put Great Spirit Raiden to sleep was true?" And answered correctly. She read the White Queen. "If she finds a spirit mage, here's what it will become. Bring him to Countess Winter." Letitia said, "That means you will catch him by force, like a slave." The Countess interjected, "As a slave?" Then she laughed and said, "Nushki, she's going to escort him as cordially as possible. Besides, they're going to listen to whatever the spirit mage demands. If the Duchess is familiar with the spirit mage, be sure to tell him to come to the north." Letitia thought, as expected, this is a priestess on close terms with the Winter family. Also, she's not sure if she's a spiritual mage, but it's a good chance to escape from a family of manners that looks like hell. Letitia said she knew the young mage. The Countess asked if it was true. If it was a spiritual mage, would she decide to help him? The woman took off her necklace, long like beads with something attached to it, and gave it to Letitia. She said, "This is a spirit stone that is common in Vintar. This stone was once so precious that a war broke out over it. But without a spiritual magician, it is impossible to use such a stone, so it is no different from what lies on the sidelines. Let him take this thing and go to the tower of the church. If he gets to the place of the test, which is on the top floor of the church, he will be able to find out for sure if he is a spiritual magician." The Countess went up to Letitia and stroked her head. Then she took her hands in hers and said, "What do you wish, your friend?" Letitia looked at this woman and thought that Winter, who needed a spirit mage, would not despise her for having half of Aletta's blood flowing in her. At the same time, the Countess was looking at Letitia and thinking about that red-eyed Duchess. Is she really the spirit mage? Did Duke Gaian really steal and bring Aletta's child to her? Letitia said he wished he could get out of the dilapidated and cramped cage he was locked in. Then the Countess said, "If she wants wealth, she'll give her the key to the family safe. If she wants fame, she'll take it to the highest place. Winter is ready to repay her with anything." Letitia felt the wind suddenly blow. She couldn't open her eyes. Even the wind with snow was blowing. White Wolf Winter's voice rang out, vowing to destroy this cage, no matter how strong it is. Dungeon. Healer Glands descended into the dungeon and said, "Look, Mr. Knight, the lady has ordered your release." "What? Why?" shouted the boy. The healer said she didn't know, but she might. "She was upset that you broke Priest Gamal's wrist." The knight replied that he did not do it because of the Duchess, but because he was very angry and could not contain his anger. The healer replied that she knew he had broken his wrist because he was angry. "Oh, by the way, the lady asked me to give you something else. She asked if you'd like to be her escort again." The guy smiled that she was alive and she was fine. "Besides, she's also asking to go back." "Ha, we'll have to rest for a while and then go." Faber didn't reach the manor a bit and fell down just in front of the entrance. Walking down the road, the maid Cara saw him. She shouted, "Faber!" "Goodness blood, did the Duke do this to you?" she asked. Faber replied, "It's nothing serious." Faber said, "By the way, he didn't know you knew his name." The maid replied, "What does she need to know at least that? Bygones." "Oh, and she didn't ask you about your wounds out of personal interest," wearily. Faber laughed. The maid said that she would try to gently ask for the service of the skillful family doctor who is in the mansion. "He is also a commoner, so he will most likely help you," she added. Faber replied, "If you're talking about Healer Gland, there's no way he'll go to her." Faber asked, "By the way, the mansion has been rather hectic as of late. Has something happened?" The maid replied, "The former Duke, Mr. Graham Maynor, has passed away. Beginning today, a funeral will be held within the next week." There were a great many people gathered in the garden. Some were suffering for Mr. Graham. Some had just come to discuss. Everyone noticed a young man standing nearby, and someone asked, "Did he even like Mr. Graham? And who was he?" The boy, the oldest son of the Maynor family, Philip Maynor, said, "How tiresome they all are," scratching his ear with his little finger. He went up to the maid and asked, "Hey you, where's that crazy wench?" But the maid didn't understand what he meant and asked, "Just what?" The boy said he meant Letitia. Shouldn't that girl come and stand in her place? The maid replied that his lordship had given the lady a special dispensation, and she might not attend the funeral. Philip was surprised, asking, "What?" Philip began to shout, "Special! You say father is suddenly favoritizing this broodmare?" The maid tried to calm Philip down by saying, "Young master, calm down. You're at Mr. Graham's funeral now." But that didn't help him, and he continued to yell further, suggesting that he should remain calm in such a situation. Back to the story of Letitia. Letitia is with the Countess in her father's study. She asked, "Will you take Berta's smile with you?" But the Countess replied, "Yes." The Countess said that by coming here she had met the Duchess, and that was enough for her. Letitia said, "Mistress Priestess, though she doesn't know what it has to do with her, the Countess is likely to be disappointed in you." Just as the Countess said, "Whatever, well, she'll look forward to her and their meeting in Vintar." Before Letitia could turn around, the woman was scurrying away again. Strange on a human, thought the girl. Because of Grandpa's funeral, everyone here, not the guards, have moved. She said she was looking for Berta's smile. All relics have levels, and the Seraphina stored in the outhouse warehouse belongs to the middle and lower level relics. The second door containing Bertha, a high-level relic, was designed to be opened only by Maynor's successors. The third door, to which Father attaches more importance, is a relic of St. Hildegard. Priestess Navtis didn't happen to set something up before she left. Suddenly, Letitia heard someone scrambling behind her. She turned around and shouted, "Who's there?" A young lady came out from behind the door and said, "Excuse me, she was looking for her father. It was Count Euro's daughter, Fiona Euro, and she was lost." Letitia, when she saw her, cried out, "Fiona!" The girl replied, "Yes, your ladyship," and pounced on her and began to hug her, telling her that she had missed her very much. Fiona replied that she missed her too. At that moment, Fiona's father walked into the room, and he yelled loudly, "Fiona!" When he opened the door, he saw that golden hair. He grabbed his daughter, and she didn't realize what had happened. All the girl said was, "Father, what happened?" Her father asked Fiona what it was that the Duchess had done toward her. Fiona replied, "It's nothing serious." Then her father looked at the Duchess and said, "Did Fiona really make her older sister cry?" Father asked, "Then why were you two in a place like this?" Fiona replied, "Well, she got lost, so she came in here, and just as she saw her ladyship." Father said, It was Philip who ordered Fiona to be lured here, and looked at Letitia. Well, and then you, Duchess Letitia, and you were going to torture her daughter, Fiona said, yanking her daddy by his cloak and saying in a sleepy voice, Daddy, why is he acting so intimidating? All she said was that her ladyship wasn't a bad man. Father said she called Philip good too, and in the end what? But Fiona said, after all, they were really just having a conversation. And Fiona asked, right, your ladyship? Letitia thought back to her past life for a second. She'd always been kind to her. Then she, walking the thorny path, couldn't even respond to Fiona once with the same affection. But she has her back even in this life. She must keep her distance from Fiona, however, lest the mistake of the past be repeated, so that she wouldn't have a connection to the teacher, and so that the Manor family wouldn't be able to manipulate her by using Fiona. Letitia said she wasn't trash like Philip. Fiona immediately picked up on this, saying, That's right, her ladyship, not a bad person at all. But Letitia told Fiona, Don't trust anyone in the Manners family. It was hard for her to say it, but she said it. Letitia went on to say that the man she could trust was only the Countiero, her father. After saying that, she thought that there would be no teacher-student bond between them. Letitia then bowed out, saying she had a meeting scheduled with her father, so would leave them. Already before leaving, she turned and said, I hope Count Jura, too, will be leaving soon. For to remain in an annex where there are no guards, you may be misunderstood. That same day, a little after the time, her father called Letitia to his study. When the girl arrived, he said, Say hello, Letitia. This is Count Euro, the enemy Templar. Letitia bowed, curtsied, and said, Count Euro, pleased to meet you for the first time. My name is Letitia. At that moment, the Count thought of the first meeting, even though they had only seen each other an hour ago. Letitia asked her father what business he had summoned her for. The Duke said, In all this time I have been too inattentive to you. Philip has the best teachers in the capital assigned to him, whom I bought at a high price, but you have only an ethics teacher. Letitia replied that she was infinitely grateful, even for that, father. The Duke said, No, is it not enough for her to have only an education in ethics? She too must study what Philip studies. The girl replied that she was foolish, and therefore would not be able to follow him. The father will have to spend even more funds, so just trust your elder brother and support him. After all, Philippe's heart is quite soft. At this moment Count Euro choked up. Letitia's father said, What she means is that her older brother is anxious over nothing and also jealous. Letitia replied, It's nothing like that. Even if brother has a soft heart, he was the most loved in the family. So who can he be jealous of? Her father asked her. Sincere? The girl replied, Of course. Letitia said, Still, brother Philip has a great and earnest passion for becoming a knight. At this moment, Count Euro laughed so much that he even spilled the tea he was holding in his hands. The Duke asked, And what made you laugh so much, Count Euro? Count Euro replied, watching his lordship's son torturing his daughter like a rabid dog. One could assume that he really has a huge passion. Though, however, if you called him to accept the Duchess as his apprentice in return for Philip, he refuses. And Letitia replied, That's right, father, she has no aptitude at all for the art of fencing. She will not practice such a thing. She likes to sit quietly in her room and browse through books. Said, See, she has no desire at all. So how can he teach her swordsmanship? He's not going to participate in it. Then the Duke got angry and said, No, he must necessarily train one of the two, Count Euro. Count Euro asked, Gosh, do you suppose you're not going to rescind your order at all in such a case? Instead of a young duke full of passion, he will choose Duchess Letitia, who has no ardor at all. The girl thought that an hour later, only after she had decided not to become his student, the same situation loomed. She asked, You probably misspoke? Count Euro said no. He didn't misspoke. He knows who will be more dangerous to Fiona. Teaching fencing to this guy with a terrible temper who is busy bullying his daughter? Now he won't stop at putting a poisonous spider in Fiona's bed or leaving it on the mouse's headboard. So it would be best if the Duchess diligently enlightened this fellow. A week on its outcome, he will see if she can raise the sword properly or not. Letitia replied, All right then. She will only study hard for 1 week, but she has a request for her father in return. Please take her with you to the Nevada banquet coming up soon. The Duke asked, Why should he leave his lost son Philip and take her with him? Letitia said, Because father is already thinking of taking her as successor instead of Philip. Her brother Philip Manor will not be attending this banquet. The girl had firmly decided that she, Letitia Manor, would be at the banquet. Letitia began her training as agreed upon with Count Euro. After a few of her movements, the Count said that he realized the Duchess's abilities. The Count told Letitia that the skill of raising a sword was not a simple art. The Count asked Letitia. She said she could become his apprentice with that skill. Letitia said yes, although it was rather reckless. Euro asked, did she originally have this kind of ambition? Then show him. At least she has the wrong pose for starters, Letitia replied. But he told himself to keep it that way. The Count said when he said that, you only have to use one hand. You have to hold with two hands. One more time. Come on. At that moment, his daughter, Fiona, was watching them. Fiona thought, it's hard on Dad. He doesn't make money that easy. When Letitia finished practicing, she fell to the ground on the grass to rest. She had forgotten that she was back in a body she had never once used a sword. I didn't realize it would be so hard to pretend to be clumsy, she thought. At this moment, Count Juro came up, brought her some water, and said, Duchess Letizia, you are very polite, but why do you not perform everything properly? The girl replied that she already lacked the ability, so it would be even worse if basic ethics were lacking as well. The Count said, like that bully Philip, he wanted to turn up his nose in case she didn't listen to him, but he didn't. What was the reason for her behavior? She wants to do well, but she inherently lacks the right skills, which is something she's worried about right now. The Count said, does she value such effort so much that he questions for what purpose it is all for? Letitia said that whatever she did, she was already a duchess after all. The Count asked, does she not even think of being recognized? After all, no one wants to be an outcast without recognition. Everyone wants to do well, to hear praise, to prove their worth. Letitia replied, is it possible to accomplish this through effort? It's not familiar to her, and she's not even willing to engage in such a thing. Then the Count stood up and said, get up and pick up your sword. She just hasn't had a chance to learn how to live, how to put forth effort. No one taught her, so now it will be up to him. She needs to show her stupid brother and heartless father who she really is. Letitia replied that she did not wish to live as Letitia of Manners. The Count said that he had always thought that she wished to be the successor of the Manners. Letitia replied that that was not the case now. Letitia got up from the ground, ruffled her clothes, and said that if she could learn the swordsmanship art of the clan family, it would be a great honor, although she doesn't have the right to do such a thing. Yura, at her, asked, speaking of her own worth, had she decided to give up fencing? Letitia fixed her hair, untied her ribbon and unraveled her hair, and replied that she was not going to become a knight or a successor. So the girl firmly decided, telling her teacher to instruct someone else, not her, in his art of swordsmanship. In the evening, Count Euro went to his room to change his clothes, when suddenly there was a knock on the door. A voice was heard. Commander! The room was entered by his assistant, who said he wished to ask for the approval of the Templars who would be attending the banquet at Nirad. The Count said, very well. Let me see the list and familiarize myself with it. The man went into a rage, his eyes rose and his teeth clenched from being displeased. He began to mutter that the Templars who would be at the banquet were 50 elite knights. He turned to the aide, crumpling the list, and shouted, is he out of his mind? The aide, barely speaking, said, wait a minute. That's what the captain in Templar Green said. It's not his mistake. So much sweat had already come off the aide. He was very anxious in telling all this to Mr. Philippe. Was he not aware of the present situation in Nirvada? Eli Nirvad. He is a character who possesses immense magical power. This power allows him to become the next candidate for the Master of the Magic Tower. However, as he heard that the guy killed the woman who gave birth to him and made a deal with the Great Devil, it is said that it is unknown with which devil exactly. But the amazing thing is that in doing so, Eli managed not to lose his body and completely retain his consciousness. No, the son killed the mother, and the mad father wanted to kill his own son? How can such a family stay sane? What the hell is going on in there? Philip held out the crumpled list to his aide and said he would only give 15 knights. Isn't the captain of the Green Templars the type who sang songs about completely destroying the devil family? This is the chance. 50 elite knights of the Holy Family will crush the spirit of the devil family. Philip said that those attending the banquet should not start a war. It is a banquet after all. So, turning to his assistant, he asked him to tweak a few more things. and afterwards to come back to him again. It was not Philippe Manère who would be escorted to the Nirad banquet, but the Duke's daughter, Laetitia Manère. The next day, Laetitia wanted to have tea and cake in beautiful solitude. The girl was enjoying a very delicious tea and silence, when suddenly the door to her room opened abruptly, and Philip entered. Loudly and pathetically he said, "Laetitia." It was obvious from his face that he was very unhappy about something. But Laetitia already knew what it was all about. The guy walked over to the table and saw that she had a brownie on the table. He shoved his hand into the cake and grabbed it. Afterward, the guy leaned over to Laetitia and said to her in a loud tone of voice, "When Grandpa was still alive, she didn't even tell him hers, and now she also doesn't come to his funeral?" The guy continued to indignantly express his opinion to Laetitia in a raised tone, saying that since she was completely crazy, did she think it was okay to become immoral as well? Laetitia took a sip of her tea as if nothing had happened and said, "She couldn't even attend her own mother's funeral, not even her grandfather's funeral." When she put the cup of tea down, she went on to say that nothing serious had happened. Philip was even more furious. He shouted, "What? How could it not have happened?" Sweat was already starting to drip off the guy. He started smiling strangely and told her she was really crazy. Laetitia doesn't even look up and says, "Where would he go if he were in her shoes? Does he think he could stay sane?" Suddenly Philip couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed her by the hair with one free hand, because as we remember, the other hand was busy with the cake, and shouted at her, "Is she seriously fucked up? With what insolence? She dares to address her older brother, and even on you." As he continued to hold the girl by the hair, he leaned over to her and said that, oh yes, by the way, he had heard that she would be attending the banquet instead of him. Laetitia replied to him that news travels fast, right? So what of it? Philip continued to resent her that while he was away at fencing practice, she had time to do a lot of things. With a smile on his face, he barked out that he could see how she had forgotten how she was an illegitimate child. And how could she only fancy herself getting the same knowledge that he could move him from being a successor to being one herself? Laetitia told him that he was just trying to look good in his father's eyes, so he was blaming her for his own stupid behavior, and Barking got mad as a dog, teeth bared. But then he decided to give Laetitia some advice. "I'm well aware that Count Euro doesn't trust people, right? As she thinks what kind of creatures he sees them as." The guy let go of the girl's hair and stroked her cheek and kept saying that he was always weaving beautiful words about them being his students. But for Count Euro, they are just a burden that he had to take on by order of his father because of hopelessness. Philip was silent for a moment, but then said, "Well, even though she was just a burden to her father, and in the end she would be abandoned anyway. The Count had chosen her as his student only out of politeness. She had better not be too excited about attending his lessons for a week." Philip looked at Laetitia and said what kind of knight could come out of some broad. Then Laetitia, without thinking, grabbed the candlestick that was on the table and said, "That's how it is. Well, in that case, she'll show him now." The girl jumped up from the table and swung this candlestick like a sword. Philip was frightened, of course, and managed to bounce away, but he fell to the floor and shouted, "What is this?" Laetitia answered, "Would she kill him quicker, or would he run away quicker? If he doesn't want to, he doesn't dare raise his voice at her, much less grab her by the hair. If he calls her a woman again, he should know he'll lose that precious calf of his at the hands of a bastard child." And barking through his teeth trying to say she's a fucking asshole. But then he got up abruptly and ran out of the room screaming crazy. Laetitia stayed in the room, dropping the candlestick on the floor. The girl clutched her head, a situation that was very upsetting, walking down the hallway and freaking out and barking and resenting how this crazy brat had bent his father to his side. Same with Count Euro, he's on her side too. It's showing through on his neck. He resented that the man who cared the hell out of his only and frail daughter was now in thrall to Laetitia. How could this be? Philip went outside to walk around a bit and calm down because he was turned on by the whole situation. As he suddenly saw not far from the garden, Fiona was standing, and Philip immediately hid behind a column so she wouldn't see him. Why was he hiding behind a pillar? Because Fiona was not standing alone, but with her father. Count Euro said, "Here she is again, preparing hors d'oeuvres for the Duchess." The girl laughed, saying back, "Yes, Daddy." Fiona tells her father how her ladyship is such a delightful person. Therefore, she really wants to be friends with her. The Earl is outraged. She can't even lift a sword properly. The Count decided to praise his daughter by telling her, "Look at her," and said that he was afraid of the young Duke Philip. Fiona replied that her ladyship Laetitia was quite different. Fiona remembered Laetitia hugging her tightly and telling her father that the Duchess was nothing like Philip. She was different. Count Euro replied, "I'm sorry, Fiona. It makes his heart clench to know that she was subjected to the young Duke's cruelty at a time when he was not teaching him the art of swordsmanship. Dad started telling me again that he warned him, but he still did not take his mind to it, and would not." The daughter interrupted her father by saying, "Aye, that's enough, Daddy. She's fine, and that's the main thing." Fiona asked her father. He said that a sword is a tool that has dual powers. For example, it means that a sword can be used not only for good deeds, but also for selfish purposes. Clip is not yet a formal successor to Maynor, but he's a man that's already waving his power around indiscriminately. She believes her father's decision not to train such a person in the Juro family's swordsmanship was the right one. In her opinion, Philip will probably only wake up and realize something when he's old, and then she has her doubts. Taking a step back as fencing, the girl exclaimed, "Oh, you're about to be late for class. Hurry up and go." Count Euro urgently ran. But on the way he shouted that Fiona is she what, secretly learning fencing? The girl laughed. From the conversation between Count Euro and Fiona, Philip, standing behind the pillar, heard the conversation. He was madly indignant, saying that these people had all forgotten their place. While Philip was peeping and eavesdropping, a butler boy ran up behind him, panted quite out of breath, and shrieked, "The young Duke, so he is here!" After puffing a bit, the butler said, "The ethics teacher is expecting you. You need to come back soon." Philip turned around, saw the butler, and said, "Rio, could you fulfill one request?" Rio asked which one, and Philip replied that he was going to hunt deer. Therefore a wolf must be prepared. Count Euro and his daughter Fiona walk into the palace. Suddenly the Count's aide approaches him and says, "Count Euro, I have a message for you, very urgent." The Count asks what it is, and the aide begins to sob, trying to tell him that the commander of the Green Templars made a fuss because there was no way they could reduce the number of knights invited to the Nirad banquet. The commander shouted that in such a case it was as if they were going to certain death. He tried to persuade him, but he wouldn't even listen to him. Count Euro clutched his head and began to think about what to do. He thought maybe the little brat should have his head cut off. The deputy said he'd done all he could, but he didn't know what else to suggest. The Count said he would talk to him himself, and the aide should follow. The boy replied, "Okay," trying to calm down and wipe away his tears. The Count turned to his daughter and said that Fiona must forgive him. He had to go away for a while. Could she wait for him? Fiona smiled and said, "Good, father." Wishing him to take care of himself and come back soon, she waved her hand at them at that moment. The girl realized that their conversation was going to go on for a long time, so the girl had an idea. No sooner had she used her idea than she saw Philip, the young Duke, approach her. The girl said she was the one who was quite busy at the moment, so she was running away, and only accepted to run away when the guy interrupted her. He said, "Running away at once when you meet is not at all unethical." Philip assured Fiona with a broad smile to calm down. He wasn't going to do anything to her today, and that wasn't why he had come. Walking up to the girl, fixing her pigtails, he said he wanted her to talk to Laetitia, who was now alone in the training ground practicing. Fiona wondered, "Why is that? Is he informing her of such important information?" Philip said, "But he doesn't even know if he'd call it the young Duke's whim." At the same time, not far from the training ground, a servant drives a sign into the ground with a hammer. At that moment, Laetitia was practicing nearby. She heard a strange rumbling sound as if someone was hammering something. When she came closer, she saw a servant hammering a sign. She asked what was he doing. Laetitia said, "After all, fencing practice is supposed to be held in this place today. Why is he putting up a sign forbidding anyone from coming here?" The servant got up, rubbed his forehead, and said that fencing practice couldn't be like that. "You're confused, miss." Laetitia said to him, "It can't be that. What does he mean by that?" The servant replied, "Have you not been informed that a deer hunt is scheduled to begin within the next 10 days in this forest, which is near the training ground? Young Duke Philip's order, he had already released the wolf manor into the vicinity of the forest. It's dangerous here now." At the same moment, Fiona was on her way to the training ground to talk to Laetitia, as Philip had asked her to do. The girl was walking through the forest and came upon a large gray wolf, just the one that had been released for hunting. Fiona was very frightened when she saw the wolf. Her knees trembled. She shook all over. All she could say was, "Mercy." The girl froze in fear and couldn't even move. Instead of running and screaming, she just stood there like a stumbling block. And the wolf didn't care whether he ate the deer or saw the girl. She was his food. The wolf salivated and his eyes turned red. He ran at Fiona. He almost jumped on her with a split second to spare. The girl only had time to scream before she realized that someone had picked her up and they were falling. Fiona rose from the ground and saw the Duchess in front of her. She couldn't even pronounce the word Duchess. A stuttering tried to mumble something. Letitia said not to yell, and she urgently called for adult help. The girl began to think. Could it really be Philip? But he wouldn't be so quick to pick up the mine just on those actions of hers. She had been too careless. If she hadn't run after hearing the servant's words about letting the wolf out, Fiona might be dead about now. Letitia realized that nothing had changed yet. And the wolf maner is the best predator of the pikenet. She couldn't kill him, but only wounded him. So the wolf went into the forest. The girl stood still for a long time. She realized that she couldn't do anything with her wooden sword, only inflict a small wound on him. Besides, it was hard for her to protect her body with her current physical strength. Letitia realized that she had to do everything to protect Fiona, drawing her sword tighter. She braced herself because she knew the wolf was about to return. And so it happened. Out of the bushes came the huge maw of a gray wolf. It came straight at Letitia. The girl swung, and swung harder to hit him as hard as possible. During her swing, she kept telling herself that she needed to show her brother and heartless father who she really was. But the wolf was stronger. He used his paw to knock Fiona's sword out of her hands, but she was able to regroup and put her hand in its jaws. The pain was unbearable for the girl. The wolf had bitten her arm with its jaw, but she had no time or energy for tears. She was worried about Fiona, that only Fiona would survive. Fiona shouted, "Duchess!" She was just shocked when she saw that the wolf had bitten the girl's arm and was bleeding a lot. Letitia cried out, "It was Philippe who told her to come here, right? That's why she told her not to trust anyone from the Manners family." Fiona cried out, frightened, "Your lordship, your hand!" The girl had both tears and a frightened face. She didn't know what to do. Letitia yelled for Fiona to keep her eyes open. She wants to learn swordsmanship, right? She'll teach her, and Fiona can be a knight too. As suddenly there was a sound, not like a dagger penetrating flesh, but more like something bursting. Letitia stood all bloody and said with the last of her strength that Fiona was just... They couldn't train themselves how to defend themselves. After all that happened, of course, Count Euro took Letitia to the castle to the healer. The healer examined Fiona, making sure she was fine, and she went to attend to Letitia. After a while, the healer left the room. The Count asked, "What's wrong with the Duchess?" During her swing, she kept telling herself that she needed to show her brother and heartless father who she really was. But the wolf was stronger. He used his paw to knock Fiona's sword out of her hands, but she was able to regroup and put her hand in its jaws. The pain was unbearable for the girl. The wolf had bitten her arm with its jaw, but she had no time or energy for tears. She was worried about Fiona, that only Fiona would survive. Fiona shouted, "Duchess!" She was just shocked when she saw that the wolf had bitten the girl's arm and was bleeding a lot. Letitia cried out, "It was Philippe who told her to come here, right? That's why she told her not to trust anyone from the Manners family." Fiona cried out, frightened, "Your lordship, your hand!" The girl had both tears and a frightened face. She didn't know what to do. Letitia yelled for Fiona to keep her eyes open. She wants to learn swordsmanship, right? She'll teach her, and Fiona can be a knight too. As suddenly there was a sound, not like a dagger penetrating flesh, but more like something bursting. Letitia stood all bloody and said with the last of her strength that Fiona was just... They couldn't train themselves how to defend themselves. After all that happened, of course, Count Euro took Letitia to the castle to the healer. The healer examined Fiona, making sure she was fine, and she went to attend to Letitia. After a while, the healer left the room. The Count asked, "What's wrong with the Duchess?" Letitia said no, she's not capable of such a thing. As suddenly Fiona shouted out, "You are capable, your ladyship!" She saw the whole thing. Then the Count, after a moment's thought, said that he would take these words as her consent. Letitia tried to say, "No, It is not what he thought. But the Earl rose from his knee and said that Letitia had saved his daughter's life, the most precious thing in the world. Letitia remained silent. She had nothing to say, but she thought about the fact that, yes, it was an inept start, but it was the first time she had used her powers. This time she had saved Fiona with her own hands. A butler came in to see Duke Maynard and began to report the incident, saying to him, "As you have seen and heard for yourself, one of the Grey Wolves was released, but he didn't stay free long and lost his life." The Duke said indignantly, "How the hell did they keep track of the controls?" The butler, lowering his head, said, "I'm sorry. There was no problem with their wolf pen. He had received a report that young Duke Philip had requested that the wolf Manor be released into the vicinity of the training ground because he wished to hunt deer." The Duke turned to the butler when he heard Philip's name. The Count began to slowly walk from the window to the table and talk about the fact that Count Euro had already mentioned it last time, that Philip had released a poisonous spider on the headboard of Fiona's bed. "That's why the Count asked me to be careful around Philippe. And this time he used the wolf manor?" By a sudden coincidence, Philip entered the Count's room. The boy came in as if nothing had happened, saying, "Father, the Duke says it's already too much this time." Philip only replied, "Well?" The Duke explained to him that although the family of Manners is higher in status than the Juro family, the gentlemen also have moral values that they must abide by. He wants the day to come when the Earl turns his back on the duchy because of Philip's stupidity. The boy would scream in an indignant voice that Count Euro and that wench Fiona despised him. They insulted his authority by saying that he was using it indiscriminately, even though he was not the official successor. The Count asked his authority in surprise and thought, turning well to the butler. He reported that Philippe was sentenced to strict confinement for a month. During this time, give him only water and food, and not allow him to go outside the main building. The butler bowed and said that he understood. The butler asked, "In that case, will he be all right?" And the Duke replied, "In that case, he will realize his position." The Duke said, "Until when would he invest in an unqualified brat, and send it back now to the teachers Philip was studying with?" Lastly, the Duke added that Philip's manners should take into account that useless weeds should be pulled before they ruin the flower garden. The Duke implied that if he did anything else, he would simply kick him out of the family. A few days later, there was the sound of a tightening rope. It was one of the Duke's assistants putting the luggage away. The boy asked Count Euro, "Is this all the stuff of the Knights Templar?" tying a knot with the rope. The Count replied, "Yes. They would be attending the Nirad banquet for 3 days. The boy turned around and looked at the Count. He didn't care how much stuff and luggage there would be. He was already all sweaty from loading all that stuff onto the cart. The Count stepped aside for a moment. When he returned, he asked, "He has prepared the Duke and Duchess's luggage, hasn't he?" The boy replied, "Yes, everything is already loaded." The main door again, and the Duke and Duchess of Manners came out of it. Count Euro greeted them by saying, "Your Lordship, it is time to get on the carriage." In one of the carriages sat Letitia and her father. The road to Nervada was a long one. The Duke sat down opposite Letitia and gazed at her. In doing so, he recalled his conversation with the butler on the eve of the journey. A butler came to the Duke and told him that one of the Grey Wolves was on the loose, but he died a short time later. The Duke turned around and asked, "Did Count Euro kill him?" And the butler replied, "No, your lordship. You may not believe this, but it was relayed through the knights who investigated the case that her ladyship had killed a wolf." What nonsense! Did Letitia have that kind of ability? How could a girl who had learned to hold a sword 4 days ago be able to put down a wolf with the same sword? The butler replied that he had died without noticing, and the Duke was very surprised by this. It was as if the wolf's body had been blown up, which had no connection to the sword. Then the Duke asked, "Does the butler mean to say that Letitia used magic?" He himself remembers when she was once very young, and he took her to church and gave her a test, but she had no talents whatsoever. Butler said that he believed, however, that the report of the knights was not false, and apologized for not being able to ascertain what had happened. The Count sat in the carriage and pondered. If you look at it that way, not so long ago he had received permission to go out from Letitia's servant. If she's not a mage, is she really? Smiling briefly, the Duke thought he was contemplating the impossible. Suddenly he decided to speak to Letitia, saying, He addressed her, "Letitia. She must be aware that Nirvad worships the 7 great devils. The girl replied, "True, father." As a child, she had heard that the head of the Nirad family had a deep respect for Iblis, the golden devil who bestowed his powers and names on the great devils. They also say she made a deal with the 6 great devils for hundreds of years. The Lord of Sins herself, the first devil to possess golden wings. She stole Hildegard's time and distributed it among her children. The names and powers of the 6 great devils are discouragement, greed, adultery, anger, gluttony, envy. She herself was the sin of pride, so she was nicknamed the Lord of the 7 sins. The great saint left it in the Holy Scripture to warn them. The Duke said that Marquis Nirad tried to control his son's mind and use him as a living weapon, but he failed. However, only the Marquis of Nirad failed in this mission. His son Eli made a deal with one of the 6 great devils, just like the past heads of the family. Marquis Nirad began to fear that one day his son would kill him. He became so distraught that he decided until his own son was dead and not to go outside, even if the emperor summoned him. It didn't look like a family that worshipped the great devil, but they summoned the high priests and put a barrier in the Marquis's room. So isolated, Nirad opened his own banquet and personally sent an invitation, even to the Holy Family. Does Manhwa know what that means? One of 2 things. Either he had finally regained consciousness, or he had managed to hold on to his son, who was a threat to him. At last the carriage arrived at the Chateau Nirad. When the Duke and Duchess stepped out of the carriage, the entire staff listened to greet them. One of the girls said she would escort them inside. As they walked down the road, Letitia thought that since the Nirvad were the kind of family that worshipped the devil, she would turn her back on the Holy Family. But that was not the case. Maybe it was because of their power. The Duke turned to Letitia and told her that they didn't know what could happen, so she needed to stay close to him. The girl knew he wouldn't have bothered with her just because she was now a member of the family. She assumes he heard the news that she had killed a wolf. So the girl replied, "All right, father. She will behave as calmly as possible so as not to cause trouble for anyone." When everyone went to the palace, they were met by Alec Nirvad, the head of the Marquis Nirvad family himself. He said that they had done a good job, having traveled such a long way, especially since it's already dark, so they'd better get some rest before the banquet tomorrow. Letitia stood and thought it must be the Marquis of Nirvad, if she remembered correctly. He had already imprisoned Eli in an underground prison. The girl frowned, for she realized that in such a case she had only one thing to do, which she was obliged to do. At night, when everyone should be sleeping, and Letitia included. But that wasn't about her. The girl jumped up and started looking at her drawn-up map plan. She reasoned that Nirvad's banquet would last about 4 days, starting tomorrow. The other aristocrats stayed outside the main mansion. Then, also, why did the Marquis greet them so cordially? Only the Duchy of Manners is a sacred family. Letitia knew that the bedroom had been assigned to her, the last room on the 4th floor in the main building of the Nirvad mansion. She jumped out of bed and put on her slippers. She started to close the curtains because she was preparing herself for what was said. Count Euro and Fiona stayed in the next room to be ready for emergencies. The girl thinks about the fact that the Marquis is on the 3rd floor. Words about special treatment for them are somehow not enough. In general, she hesitates to think that it's probably because Marquis himself is a floor below, and their family is a floor above, that things get weird. She assumes that he wants to hide something or has ulterior motives. Treatment. I said her prep went perfectly. She burned her chart, because she had memorized this map of the mansion every night since the day she became an apprentice to the Count, braiding her hair into pigtails like the maids of this palace. She also asked the friendly healer Glands to get her some of the Marquis's maid's clothes. Right now, Letitia is buttoning the last button of her dress. Letitia opened the door and stepped out into the hallway as she suddenly heard someone call out to her saying, "Lady." Turning around, she saw Faber. He asked where she was going in the middle of the night, and even in a maid's outfit. The girl replied that there was a place where he would need to be a little quieter. The guy replied okay, but asked her where she was going to go. As they ran down the corridor, Letitia asked Faber if he had taken with him what the Glands healer had given him. Faber replied, of course he brought everything the physician gave him. The girl asked, "And the medicine?" Faber stopped and started looking. He said he put it in a separate crystal vial and said it was really hard to get it, but he found it. "Well done," said Letitia, and they ran on. Faber asked again, "Well, where is she running to?" At this moment, Somewhere in the dungeons is Eli Nirad, a guy chained by his hands to the wall with iron handcuffs. He's blindfolded so he can't see what's being done to him. The guy's shirt is torn and he's covered in blood. Eli is approached by a bald man at the Marquis' behest. He taunts him by barking at him with a whip in his hands. He said that by torturing him like this, he believes the great devil he made a deal with will not disappear so easily. Would they be better off begging Marquis to let him live? He's really going to die at this rate. Eli answered him. Even if he dies at the hands of that bastard Marquis, he won't beg him for anything. The bald man whipped a whip next to the guy, supposedly to scare him, and said he couldn't even fight back anymore. What was the point of acting like that? Does he know what these handcuffs he is chained to the wall by his hands represent? He does not know the details, but it is said that Bertha's silence suppresses magical powers to such an extent that they cannot be used at all, and that it is a precious holy relic obtained by the Nirad family in a long struggle against the Manor family. The bald man was trying to explain something to Eli, got too close so much so that Eli abruptly moved away from the wall to scare him and said, "What a talker! Wouldn't it be better to just kill him?" And then Eli motioned to the bald man and told him that if he managed to get out of here, the first thing he would do would be to rip his creep to shreds. The man, startled, pulled back, scratched his ear where Eli had whispered to him and said, "What a jerk." Swinging his whip, he struck Eli. At that moment, Faber and Letitia walked into this torture room. How did they know that this was the room where the torture was taking place? They had just heard the bald man screaming when he was angry with Eli. The man shouted, "And who are you? How did they get here?" Letitia said, "Call them foreigners." Faber's face creased because he didn't know what to even say to that question. At that moment, in the background, behind the bars, Eli was hanging on his own hands, chained to the wall. He too did not understand who the foreigners were. The bald man who had been striking Eli ran out of that cage and shouted, "Are you magicians of a different faith?" This feeder said that they could not use magic in a dungeon where there was not a single rat to be used as a sacrifice. When Faber heard these words, he asked quietly to Letitia, "Is he really a sacrifice?" Letitia told him, "I'm sorry, of course," rolling up her sleeves to her elbows. The girl used her superpower, which she had already managed to pump up a bit, pointing it in the direction of this bald male dustman. She said that Faber didn't have to be a rat. Letitia did it, she hit it, but not quite, missed a little. "If he's still alive, light it and go outside. Look for the net," the guy said. "Got it." Faber walked up to the bald man and hit him with a right hook. At that moment, Letitia opened the iron cage and walked in on Eli. Letitia walked over to the guy hanging on the wall and thought it was Eli Nirad, the only person who prayed for the repose of her soul at a time when the others were pointing fingers at her, even after death. She didn't think she'd meet him in such a horrible place. Eli asked who she was. Letitia saw that Eli had a blindfold over his eyes, so he couldn't see who she was. She stepped closer, took two hands and untied this ribbon that was over Eli's eyes. When she pulled on it, the ribbon came undone, and Eli could see. She said she was a very bad mage. Eli tried to open his eyes. He was in a lot of pain because he had been blindfolded for a long time. When he was able to open them just a little, he saw the girl standing in front of him. Everything was blurry in his mind. Letitia told him that she was a hypocrite for coming here to use him, and apologized that she couldn't come early. Eli smiled and said that meant she was a very kind hypocrite for coming and trying to help him. The girl then began to remove his shackles from his hands and asked his name. Letitia said she couldn't tell him that now, but would do it a little later. She continued trying to get those handcuffs off, and finally she did it. The handcuffs opened, and Eli just collapsed to the floor because he didn't have the strength to stand. The guy asked why she was helping. Letitia reached into her pocket and started pulling out the medicine she had brought with her. Opening the jar, she replied, "Because you helped me. Also because you're the person who can save me." Letitia leaned Eli against herself so he could drink the potion and said that yes, that's how things would work out soon. But now he needs to open his mouth and drink that magical tranquilizer. It couldn't heal his wounds, but better something than nothing. The boy opened his mouth, and Letitia helped him drink the potion. Eli coughed. Not very tasty, it turned out. After he felt much better, he got up and went to leave the cage. Letitia said that it was not advisable to move yet, and that he should lie down for a while. Eli turned and said, "Does she really care about a man who made a deal with the great devil?" The guy told her to close her eyes and hang around. He had some things to do. Eli walked over to his abuser and told him, even though he was passed out, that he told him he'd tear his creep to shreds first. If he got out of here, that's what happened. The boy drew his dagger and swung it to kill him. The man who made a deal with the great devil was a monster that could magically heal his body, with the help of whatever victim was in front of him at the moment. It was his abuser, who tortured him with a whip and more. After something like this, such people are no longer human beings. The torturer said it was a disgusting taste. Then he headed for the cage and said that he would find out Letitia's name himself. If he wanted to use it, so be it. Since whoever she was, he would let her dispose of it as much as she wanted. The boy bowed and kissed Letitia's hand. The girl looked toward the window and said, "It's beginning to dawn." Eli told her, "We need to leave this place as soon as possible." The girl asked, "What about him?" Said he still had a case he had to take care of. They were sure to meet again soon. Eli asked Letitia to leave as soon as possible, and she did so. Letizia came out of the castle and saw Fabio. He had just disposed of the guards. The boy shouted, "Lady!" They headed for the cell room of the man who had recently been tortured. "I think he's seen him somewhere. He is Nirvad's son, isn't he?" Letitia replied that she knew the man. Faber was surprised, saying that in the same case, should they leave him there in such a state? Shouldn't they save him, get some wagon and take him out? But Letitia replied that she had already given him an occasion for escape. At one point, Letitia stopped. The girl hesitated. His choice to stay in this place must be. That decision has any intention. And yet she ran, just as Eli had asked her to. The next morning, Letitia went out for a walk in the garden. Faber was beside her when suddenly Fiona came running out shouting, "Letitia! Did your father's snoring last night reach your room?" Fiona ran up and said she had knocked on her door in the middle of the night. But it seemed Letitia wasn't in her room. Fiona asked, did she run out of her own bedroom because it was too noisy? Nearby, Faber turned away and began whistling as if he didn't know what they were talking about at all. Letitia replied that they had been traveling a very long time in the carriage, so she was a little stuffy, which caused her to go and get some air in the garden. Fiona noticed that a man was standing not far away, and servants were gathered around him, some sort of commotion forming. When she was able to get a better look, she saw that it was the Marquis of Nirad. The girl thought that it seemed that they had prepared something big for the banquet tonight. If they had invited the Holy Family, they were not going to make them participate in the devil worship ceremony. Marquis also noticed Letitia. She looked at him and told Faber that they needed to talk in private. So, finally came that long-awaited banquet. The guests were gathered in a big, huge hall that had several floors. People were both on the balconies and downstairs, just sitting. In the middle of the hall there was like a round stage on which the Marquis came out and said that he was offering his thanks to all the gentlemen who were present at today's Nirvad banquet. The Marquis was very loud and happy that everyone had to travel a long way, but still so many guests had gathered. First of all, he would like to ask everyone to accept a glass of congratulatory wine. Servants and maids began to approach people with trays and glasses and offer wine. A servant girl approached Count Euro, but he refused the wine. Also, one of the servants approached Duke Manhwa, Letitia's father, and he gladly accepted. Taking a sip, the Duke said, "Judging by the Marquis's desire, he assumes the Marquis has prepared something insignificant." Also, the Marquis went on to tell everyone that also, so that the honored guests who had come here would not be bored, he had prepared an interesting entertainment for everyone. Telling her maids to let them begin, the girl nodded her head that she understood. The lights went out in the entire hall. Letitia and Count Euro were a little wary of this. Suddenly a light flashed, directing its spotlights to the center of the hall. They had set up a small tent in the middle of the hall, and Harlequin, the mass entertainer, was standing beside it. This Harlequin was dressed in a costume, and his face was covered by a mask. He said, "Inside this tent is a terrible monster. It's the infamous Loki monster, caught by the young master Eli." People began to whisper on the balconies, and there was a slight commotion everywhere. Harlequin says he has the body of a beast. The human face look is too creepy. He wants to show it to everyone, ladies and gentlemen, but is worried it might scare them ladies. Strange noises began to come from the tent. Harlequin went on to say that, but the gracious Marquis Nirvad had given a fair chance to them all. A chance to be the man with enough courage to finish off Loki. The people began to whisper again. At that moment, Letitia suspected something unimportant. She shuddered as she jumped up from her chair and thought, "Really?" The Harlequin continued to shout that the aristocrat who would dispose of this hideous monster would be given as much coin as he wanted. Letitia said, "No, it can't be that Loki is quietly in such a hectic place without causing some kind of chaos." Some strange sound, a crackling sound, began to appear under the tent, and people began to shriek, "Bravo!" to those who dared to go and launch an arrow to kill this Loki. Count Euro turned to his daughter and the Duke, saying, "The atmosphere is heating up. Please be behind him." Letitia shouted, "Faber!" The guy saw her and said, "Yes!" Sometime earlier, on a morning walk in the garden, Letitia had asked Faber if he had brought his watch with him by any chance. The boy said he had his watch with him just in case. After that incident with the Gamal lighting, the girl is sure that something is going to happen at the banquet itself tonight, and she said that if she gives him a sign, he should turn off everything related to the lights in the banquet hall. Faber wondered, "Why would you do that, ma'am?" After Letitia called out to Faber in the banquet hall, he realized everything. It was a sign. He ran to do what she had asked him to do that morning. Letitia had learned the map of the Nirad house a few days before the banquet, so she easily explained where the lights were turned off in this castle. The light switch should be here somewhere, on the left side of the corridor you enter when you leave the banquet hall and turn right. The girl had told him in the morning that they were probably using a magic power similar to theirs, so he would be able to figure out how to straighten her out, right? Faber, walking over to a certain wall, put his hand on it and said, "Of course, he knows how to do it. But—" The boy became very curious as to what Mistress was up to. When he put his hand on it, a bright light appeared. Meanwhile, in the banquet hall itself, the following is happening. All the people who want to participate take turns going to the center of the hall, taking an arrow and trying to launch that arrow into the tent. Underneath the tent was an iron cage. Some incredulous gentleman asked the Harlequin if there was no crying heard. "Is Loki definitely there?" Harlequin walked over to the tent, lifting it up, peering in and saying what he sees. They are full of doubt. The pitiful and dumbfounded Loki is surely trembling, awaiting the end of his fate. The guy kept yelling that Loki was about to take his last breath. "So you better shoot. Who will be the last person to appropriate this chance?" A bunch of people appeared under the stage, each one stretching out their hand and shouting, "He'll do it! Give him a chance!" Everyone wanted to give it a try and make a lot of money. But inside wasn't Loki, it was Eli. And in a past life, Marquis Nirad had ordered his own son to be imprisoned in an iron cage, deceiving everyone that he was Loki. And then last time, Eli lost one eye from an arrow shot by a certain aristocrat. Yet yesterday Letitia had to bring him to her by force. As it happened that he had been grabbed again, the girl rushed quickly towards the stage to make sure she had time to do something at least. Seeing a guy, however, who seems to look like he was in a past life, if she remembers correctly, this is the same guy who took Eli's eye away. The boy drew the arrow in his bow and froze. Letitia thought that this was the moment when Eli would lose his eye. Suddenly, Letitia popped up in front of the tent. She stood up, spreading her arms. The archer, who was about to shoot, shouted, "What's she standing there for? She needs to get out of there." Then Letitia said, "Marquis Nirvade, will you shoot that monster?" The Marquis asked in surprise. "Is she Letitia Maynor?" The girl said she was about to show something amusing, and his lordship. Then the Marquis said, "Give the young Duchess his bow. He is already in anticipation, Duchess of Manners. There will only be one arrow. You need to tackle the cloth-covered cage and get right into Loki's heart." What did Letitia do? She grabbed a bow and arrow, turned around sharply and fired that arrow at Arlecchino. With that she wounded him in the leg, and Harlequin fell screaming on the stage. Then she turned around and said, "Well, how about it? Is that enough for fun?" Duke Maynor, who saw his daughter shooting a bow, asked Count Hero, "Did he teach Letitia how to shoot a bow instead of fencing for a week?" The Marquis laughed and started clapping. He really liked what Letitia had done. He shouted, "That was amusing. However, such entertainment is not enough." At this time, Harlequin, who was sitting on the floor with an arrow in his leg, cried out, "Marquis, save him!" Then Marquis said that he didn't ask to deal with a pathetic and miserable actor. He had asked to hunt Loki, who was in an iron cage. "If you have nothing else to show for it, cede the bow to the next person in line." Letitia put the bow on the floor and said, "All right." She thought that would be enough. But it was not enough for the Marquis. Then Letitia decided to use her powers by unleashing a great wave of her magic. She made herself a bow and arrow and said, now she's going to show something really fascinating. There was a chill around. Letitia's magic was like frost. People who saw this magic began to shout, "The Duchess is a magician! She's a magician!" Everyone was running away. "She's using magic! Hurry up and run away!" the shouts continued. At this moment, Count Euro and Duke Manhwa saw Letitia using magic. The Duke thought, Letitia, she really is using magic. It's certain now, no doubt about it. The girl released an arrow that flew straight into the tent to throw off that huge cape. When the cape was removed, it wasn't Loki in the middle of the cage, but Eli. And that's what everyone saw. People began to scream. Inside the iron cage is not Loki, but a man. How is this possible? The Marquis has tricked them! Letitia pulled her watch out of her dress pocket and thought that right now she needed to signal Faber as soon as possible. She scrolled that clock at her place. At the same moment it rang at Faber's. And that was his command to put out the lights. The guy managed it, and the hall lights went out and it got dark. Letitia headed for Eli. Walking up to him, she said, Eli, still. She shouldn't have gone off and left him there yesterday. She had to protect him to the very end. When the girl touched him, she realized that he was on fire, as I expected. One magical tranquilizer wasn't enough. The guy was blindfolded and his hands were blindfolded again. He could barely move. At this very moment, while Letitia was fussing and trying to untie him, and Lai heard and saw everything, but very cloudy, because his eyes were blindfolded. He no longer saw but felt her sacred aura of the Manhwa family. The girl was at this moment trying to find the keys to the handcuffs she didn't have so she could remove them from Eli. Eli thought, although he knew about the young Duchess giving him an important opportunity to learn about the Marquis' madness, but he had never imagined that it would be in such a crazy form. Letitia realized at this point that the boy was completely unconscious. She took another bottle of the potion out of her dress and put it in her mouth. Then she leaned toward him and handed him all the medicine she could get into her mouth through a kiss. After Letitia handed Eli the medicine through a kiss, he woke up and came to his senses. Letitia, too, was affected by this healing cocktail. She felt a little dizzy, and heard a voice telling her that he would pay back his debt to his benefactor. Letitia opened her eyes and could not understand whose voice it was. When she came to her senses a bit, she sees Eli standing in front of her and says, Letitia Manhwa. She wondered how he knew her name. The boy asked, What does she want with him, princess? Letitia yelled at him. How could she want or desire anything if he was in a cage? She said that he should escape from the Nirad family and become the owner of the magic tower. He would become the next master of the magic tower. The guy said, That's how, and started taking out the arrows that had hit him during the stupid show. He went up to Letitia, gave her his hand, and said that if she was not lying, his benefactor, he swore by his god, that would break the cage and help his princess. At that moment, Letitia looked at Eli and thought he was the great god of hell. Suddenly a light appeared in the great hall. The people who stayed and did not run away shouted, The light is on! Hurrah! Also remaining in the hall were the Count, Euro, Duke Manhwa, and Fiona. Euro said, The lights are on, and they all looked towards Letitia. When the lights came on, Marquis Nirad saw Eli. Yes, he was so surprised that he wasn't in a cage with his hands untied that he fell out of his chair shouting to the whole room, It's him! Yes, how dare he stand not shackled in front of him? They've locked him up! That demon! Walking up to the Marquis, he said, knowing full well that he fears him. That's why he imprisoned him in the dungeon, fearing he would kill him. Eli came this close to the Marquis, leaned over and asked, Does he really hate him that much and tried to kill him because he doesn't like him? As Eli approached the Marquis, he had flashbacks of his mother, Ellie. He remembered how he'd stabbed her with a dagger. At that moment his mom was very upset for her son's act. Her last words were that he was her son, and Eli didn't understand what he had done. His mother told him it was at his father's will, her little son. Was it his wish? Smiling then, the boy replied, Yeah, but he didn't realize yet himself how it would turn out for him. And so, back from memory to reality. Now there's Marquis standing in the middle of the hall. The guards saw Marquis and headed towards them, but Eli said, Stop! He let the guards know to be sure. He wouldn't do anything. He wants to say goodbye one last time to the Marquis. The boy said, Father will protect him. At this moment, Count Euro finally reached Letitia. Walking up to her, he asked if she was all right. The girl replied, Yes, she is fine. Here for some reason the Duke, who had picked up his sword, said, he wants to make something clear. Approaching unhurriedly Eli, he said, would he mind explaining to him what he has to do with his daughter? Wanting a more detailed answer, the Duke pointed his sword in Eli's direction. Marquis, said the Duke. Then Eli said, Gayen Maner. Guy stood up and thought, he can't be Gayen Maner's shadow all his life. Was he now waiting for a detailed answer from him? Eli started to approach slowly, but the Duke told him to stand still. Eli thought when he saw the Duke that he was even uglier than his parents. He has that arrogant look in his eyes. He is not a man who is truly ready to protect his child. Eli said that if he was so insistent, let's do it now. The Duke told him to stay where he was and not to go anywhere. Eli said that then on their next meeting he would propose to his daughter. You'll give him a chance, won't you? The Duke shouted, to stop him from talking nonsense. The guy got so close that he could already touch the sword. He said he wasn't kidding, taking the sword in his hand. He said, do you think you will be able to harm him with such a sword? And that sword bent in Eli's hand several times. Then he grabbed the sword and threw it towards Count Euro. When he saw this, the Duke shouted and ran towards him. The Count tisked indignantly at the man bending his sword and throwing it away. Eli walked past, for he had no need of the Duke at all. He headed straight for Letitia. As he approached her, he bowed and said, my lady. Next time he would meet her as the Marquis of Nirad. Eli smiled and said that the Duke would be his son-in-law. You'll see. But the Duke was pathosisly indignant that he thought becoming a Marquis would make a difference. He very much doubts it. Eli said he would try to change things either way. The guy said the conversation had gone on long enough. Then see you later and good health to all. He headed for the exit. But he turned around and said, Father, and nothing more. The Marquis was very much frightened by this phrase. The boy headed for the exit. The people standing around him stared at him. No one said anything, and even the guards didn't stop him. The Duke headed for the exit as well, but told Count Euro to take Letitia and go back to Manor. The Count said he could not go home, leaving the Duke here. But the Duke was indignant, and answered angrily that he should not make him repeat himself twice. Turning around, he once again said, take Letitia and come back right now. That's an order. The Duke will stay with the Marquis of Nevada. They have something to talk about. The Marquis raised his head and just laughed. When the Marquis and the Duke were able to have some quiet privacy, they had a conversation. The Marquis said, I'm sorry. Even so, I didn't manage to have a proper time with you. Duke Manor replied that it had nothing to do with him now. Bertha's silence is a relic that disappeared from the face of the earth long ago, so it is only an unnecessary thing. So now he's going to die at the hands of his own child. The Marquis cried out in terror. He asked the Duke for help. Nirad said to kill his son by pounding his fist on the table. No, he's not even his son. Just kill that horrible monster. Duke sat there thinking how tired he was of hearing all this. Gayen Maner asked, quite a complicated situation, Marquis. Why should he do it? He'll give him everything if he kills Eli. The Duke asked, is it good that you are willing to give your dearest everything? And the Marquis replied, yes, he's willing to do anything. Then Gayen suggested that they move on to the prophecy. The Marquis agreed and said that, frankly speaking, there was nothing of value in his mansion. Gayen said that the prophecy is written in the last chapter of Hivron, and he knows it is kept in the magic tower. Gayen promised that he would kill Eli. However, if the prophecy comes true, his plan will fail. The Marquis began to yell that the prophecy records were only available to the head of the magic tower. To become the head of a magic tower, one must get the consent of the 4 elders, and so the next head of the magic tower needs the consent of the 2 elders. The Duke smiled and asked, and who will oppose him? The head of the family. A Stephen has been missing recently after all. Let's move on. Then the North suffers from food shortages. The Duke told Marquis that if he agreed to go there, no one would mind. Marquis shouted that no, he didn't want to, but only if the Duke killed Eli, he would do anything. The 3 warriors who killed the Golden Dragon, Danaya, the Lord of the North, the Marquis of Nevada, and the head of Maner. A curse was placed on them that was passed down from generation to generation. His grandfather, Gallium Maynor, died from the curse of the Golden Dragon. Next up is Graham Maynor. He too died of a curse. They all asked St. Hildegard to have mercy on them. The next ones will be Maner, Nirvad, and the Lord of the North again. The Marquis asks him not to let the curse be passed by families through him. The Duke said it was time for him to return. The Marquis replied that he would prepare a carriage for him. The Duke turned around and said he didn't need Satan's carriage. The Book of Prophecies records all the curses and the times of the three families. If he calculates the prophecy, he will understand why Letitia has changed. And he has to figure out what abilities she has now. The Manor's carriage is returning home. Fiona and Letitia are sitting in the carriage, and behind them, Count Juro and the knight Faber are riding on horses. Fiona enthusiastically tells Letitia that she has surprised her very much. Fiona thought Letitia was hiding her magical abilities, but she has shown them to so many people today. Now everyone knows that the lady has magical powers. She will probably be sent to the Tower of Magicians. Letitia replied that she didn't know. Fiona shouted, "Oh right," and clapped her hands together. A few days ago, she had heard Father and the Duke talking about permission to leave the central church. Letitia thought that means it had already reached her father's ears. The girl got upset and lowered her head. She thought that since he knew what kind of magic she had, it would be better to choose the church. It's not like she can't be locked up in the Duke's house forever for fear of Manor's surveillance. Now she must move, relying on her choices, and she had already contemplated two paths. The first was to try to get closer to the north. She hadn't met the Countess of the North yet, but she had gotten a soul stone from the high priest who had followed her. She must make sure the high priest and the countess are on the same side, but it is impossible for her to leave the Duchy of Manor now. If she met the Count of the North, it was a happy accident. The second way is to get help from Nirad. Eli expressed his gratitude. Whatever his intention was, it meant that he was willing to help her. If Eli wants to become the master of the magic tower, is it worth waiting a few more years? Letitia returned to her conversation with Fiona. She asked, "What did they talk about?" Fiona replied that about who to put on Letitia's defense when she headed to church. Letitia was very tired from today. She was already yawning, but she answered Fiona that Faber could protect her. She said, "But because that uncle, the Grey Knight, according to the Duke, the way there is hard, many views. You should take at least one Red Division knight on such a journey." Letitia said in surprise, "A Red Division? Only to waste the time of such a capable knight." Fiona was indignant. What? Did she mean to say that the Duke was wasting his time defending her? But Letitia didn't even have the energy to answer. She realized that she had used a lot of magic, and she felt awfully sleepy. Besides, my father had already recommended a knight worth trusting. All of this could have been changed. She was finally beginning to create her future with her own hands. Letitia tried to mutter something else. Besides, if this keeps up. But Fiona realized she was tired, and she finally fell asleep. Fiona wanted to ask what she was saying, but then realized that Letitia was very tired, so she only said, "The lady is asleep and calm." A few days later, beautiful weather on a sunny summer day. The Manor family's summer garden, a glass pavilion with different kinds of flowers. Just today, Fiona had arranged to meet Letitia for tea. The girl saw Letitia and shouted, "Lady!" She was genuinely happy to see her and waved her arms to come over to her. Letitia saw Fiona and the knight standing next to her. As she came closer, she recognized him. She remembered them all, because this was already a second chance at life. The guy bowed and said, "Lady, it's a pleasure to meet you." The guy introduced himself, that he was the eldest son of the Rowan family, the Red Knight Ruvion Euro. Letitia bowed to him too and said she was pleased, Sir Euro. Rowan said that the Duke sometimes called his father Sir Euro, so he could be called the same. He bowed once more and said he would accompany her until they reached the church. He asked Letitia, "Will you allow him to protect you?" Of course, she immediately remembered her past life, and the moment when he had yelled like a rabid dog at her. Letitia Manor. If he found out about her sins, he would kill her with his own hands. He'll repay her the way she did Fiona. Ruvion is Count Euro's adopted child, Fiona's adopted older brother, Rowan Euro. In a past life, he came to her, throwing her a vial and telling her it was the deadly poison belladonna. He turned to her saying, "Lady," as he thinks of his father who treasured her as his student. He gives her one last chance to die painlessly. After all, Fiona was her father's only jewel. The boy was upset and worried. Fiona didn't know if it was good-naturedness or hatred. It was déjà vu because the man who had given her the poison in her past life was standing in front of her now and smiling. Letitia, of course, answered him very coldly. She said, "Certainly, Sir Ruvion," and stepped aside. Ruvian Euro was expecting something from Letitia, but obviously she didn't tell him. Fiona noticed some strange atmosphere between Letitia and Ruvian. Letitia thought he didn't like her. Fiona tried to refuse. "Lady brother, I apologize, but the conversation didn't work out for anyone." Letitia turned around and headed for the exit, telling Fiona that she should thank her father for letting her get out to the church. She asked where Count Euro was right now. Fiona replied that he was in the hall where the Red Knights were practicing, and asked if Letitia was really going to go there. Fiona ran after Letitia and asked her, "Lady, is it because your brother doesn't inspire confidence like the other knights?" The boy looked toward Letitia and remembered his father saying, "She looks cold, but she's very kind in practice." Letitia came to her father's study, knocking. A maid opened, and the girl entered. She walked over to her father's desk. The Duke looked up, saw her, and asked, "Has she met Ruvian?" The girl smiled and replied, "Yes, father, the enemy knight has become her bodyguard, so thank you very much." The Duke asked because he noticed that his daughter didn't look very happy. Letitia replied, "No, father, she is really very happy." The Duke was very busy with paperwork, so he said what she had happened already, and to her arguments there was no business in it. It was her problem. She should be like Fiona, the sweet, gentle daughter of an aristocrat. Letitia smiled and said, "Honey, right, did I hear that?" He said it felt like he was bringing in a 100-year-old tree that had worn out its life. Fiona noticed that something was wrong with her father. He realized she had magic and now decided to check. Father and daughter, didn't he? Of course, at first glance, it might seem like they could be a friendly family together. And sometimes she really wants to believe it, that she is the daughter of a good father. Thus he wants to use it as he did before. The Duke took a cup of tea, and shivering, he told her to sit down. She figured he was a sly fox already up to something. Letitia said she had something to tell him. Her father asked what it was, and he listened to her intently. She began to say that when she came of age, she asked to be removed from the family tree. After hearing these words, the Duke almost broke his cup and choked on it in anger. He stood up, slapped his hand on the table and shouted, "What is this nonsense? She's talking!" "Well," Letitia said quite calmly that she couldn't put her name on the Duke family's great family list. "Doesn't the father agree with the late grandfather's words?" The Duke jumped up from his chair and started pacing around the room, saying that she wasn't serious, right? If it's a joke, it's not funny anymore. Letitia said that she has always been sincere with him, and it seems that her father doesn't know this because he didn't take much interest in her. The Duke snorted and asked, "Is she trying to say she's not going to succeed me?" Letitia replied, "Yes." He calmed down a little and said in a calm voice that if she was serious, Philippe would be the successor. What does Letitia think will become of the family if he takes over? Doesn't she think that then all the mice and birds would immediately disappear? Then the girl asked, "What will change if she becomes the successor? And would she be able to overtake Philip by becoming head?" Father answered intellectually, "She is much smarter than Philip." The Duke said that he was going to send Philip to the hot spots. At that very moment, a maid entered the study. There was a maid in the hallway who saw Philip come to the door, but he waved his hand for her not to say anything. Philip heard what the Duke was saying about him, moving to the door so he could hear better. The Duke continued, and if he gave her away to some Marquis or Duke to marry, it was unlikely she would keep her chastity. Wouldn't she then blame him for ruining her whole life? The Duke said that in her father's presence she could say anything and should not hide anything from him. Letitia said that Philip advised her to become the rich old man's second wife and start helping to run his household. Letitia thought it used to be said that this was the way to preserve nobility. But was it not worse to live under the supervision of an old man? Then she decided to ask her brother to make exactly the same choice to help him take the throne. Did she say that if she became head, her father would be forced out of the house? The Duke heard and said to Letitia, "Like my grandfather, my father now lives in a separate room and has thrown away all his old things. But what if the same thing happens to my father in the future?" The Duke said that he apologized for neglecting Letitia all this time, and he would like to forget all these old grudges. Philip, standing outside the door, was very much angry. He thought that he knew that his father and Letitia had been having many private conversations lately, and now he could also hear what they were talking about. Letitia said, yes, those are really old grudges, and she knows her father had a lot of problems in the past too. The girl stood up and said that, and sure enough, when she became successor, she would also remove Philip from this palace. Letitia knew that Philip was standing outside the door, so she said so. Turning toward the door, the girl said loudly, "Philippe Manet! Why is he standing there by the door?" At the same time, Philip opened the door and walked into his father's study. Philip's face was very displeased. The boy was indignant that they were already deciding his fate without him. When Philip walked in, Letitia turned around and said that all he could do was stand and eavesdrop on his father under the study, instead of coming in and having a proper conversation. The girl said that he made her very angry. Philip replied that he had just walked in and hadn't even had time to say anything yet. The Duke stood up and said, "That's enough, stop swearing." Letitia had a plan. She said, "That's it, father," looking at her brother, and added, "If saying goodbye is the right thing to do," and threw herself at Philip, grabbing him by the hair. The Duke ran to them to separate them and shouted, "Enough of this, Letitia!" The girl started pulling his hair and said that he was just passing by and decided to overhear their conversation. She says that she'll do whatever she wants anyway once she becomes the successor, and proceeds to pull Philip's hair. The guy yells, "Let him go, you crazy woman!" He is hurt and resentful that Letitia could be the successor and not him. The Duke finally separated his brother and sister to stop fighting and said that Philip was a very silly fellow in his own right, but he didn't say that Letitia would make everything a successor, not that they could read his mind. And in his opinion, you can't get your hopes up at all. They're both good. After hearing these words, Letitia was a little restrained and smiled. The Duke noticed this and thought, "Why is she smiling?" But I soon realized, did she do that on purpose to avoid becoming the successor? Duke thought so. She's some kind of crazy. Every day her mood changes. He realized at once that she had definitely changed, but he didn't know the reason yet. Letitia answered him that he knew all this himself. The Duke's eyes just radiated the question. Why did Letitia say, would he really hit her the way her grandfather had hit her? The Duke replied that he was not a grandfather. Maybe, of course, as a punishment, she would be investigated and sent to Wilhelm's monastery. Letitia will probably come to her senses there for sure, but the girl said there's no way to send her there. The Duke looked at his daughter with a surprised look and thought, why wouldn't it work? And the daughter replied that he must have forgotten by now that she, and not Philip, had been taken to the banquet at Nirad. Moreover, an article was published urging them to go to the church's testing ground. So if he sent her to a convent saying, for example, that she had gone mad, there would be big trouble. The Duke shouted, "What impertinence!" Letitia didn't mind either. Yes, that's right, it is impertinent, but it's not without reason either. Isn't she his daughter? Even if the dog is stoned, he'll protect her. Maybe she's not his daughter anymore. So the girl stated that if he wanted to use her, he should treat her a lot better than he does now. Well, the Duke himself realized that he hadn't thought she would say such a thing, of course, but if you think about it, he was wrong initially. Letitia left her father's study and said that she would go to church in a week, and so would Philippe Manet. She would pray to the great Lord to give him some strength. When the girl left the office, Philip fell to his knees, grabbing his father's cloak, and said he had screwed up. The lad had just tearfully begged his father to reconsider his decision on the succession to Letitia. His father yelled at him to go away and stay away from him until he calmed down. When Letitia left her father's study, she walked and thought about how she was very scared. She was alone, and she would like someone to help her. Even though she knew all hope was in vain, she expected some help. But there are no supporters in this mansion. All the servants look away and whisper behind their backs, and some even allow themselves to laugh openly. From her previous life, she was very weak, since the previous Duke was a very strong man. And trying to save my life, everyone sided with the strongest, without any pity or remorse, much less guilt. It was raining outside. It dripped on the roofs of the building and the marble tiles. As Letitia walked, she heard voices and even shouts. The girl reached the end of the corridor and went down to the street. She saw a crowd of maids and a servant standing there. She asked, "What are you doing?" And in that crowd she saw her maid Cara. The butler shouted, "Cara! This girl has stolen the princess's necklace, and on the instructions of the head maid, he is punishing her." Letitia walked up to Cara and asked, "Did she steal her necklace?" The maid shouted, "No, she didn't steal it!" Then Letitia said, "She hasn't lost anything, has she? Where is the necklace that was stolen? Show her." And the servant said that the maid Maria had taken it with her to bring it back to the princess's room. They decided to do it quietly so as not to disturb her. One of the words, But would she end up punishing them too? Letitia kept standing there thinking. Maria? She tried to remember what it was like in her previous life. The eldest maid, Maria, she was no different from her grandfather. She hadn't changed a bit even after his death. To avoid being an eyesore to the new head of the household, she had no choice but to side with him. And with Philip out of the picture, she was the only successor left. Now it all made sense to Letitia. They'd just set Cara up to take out their rival. After all, no one will listen to Cara who has no connection or support. Letitia thought, such childish tricks. She said to Cara, I didn't steal the necklace, so you can be free to go. One of the servants shouted, How could it be? She sure stole it. Letitia said that Cara was her devoted maid. If Cara had taken the necklace, which she herself remembers nothing about, she wouldn't have done anything with it. Even if she stole, she should be punished, not you. How dare you? Some of the servants began to shout again, but the head maid said that discipline must be maintained. Letitia laughed and said, Discipline? Is the word maid more important to you than the word princess? And all at once they were silent. Someone said, I think so. Then the girl said, You're fired! Turning to Cara, she told her to get up. The girl was a mistress? Then Letitia asked her, could she please go back to her room and bring a cup of tea to Letitia's room? Really cried and got upset. She said, Yes, I will bring everything now and prepare a change of clothes for mistress. Maria, the head maid, was standing on the balcony during all this conversation. She saw and heard it all. Maria was about to leave. She had a necklace in her hand, which she clutched tightly with anger. As a voice came from behind her, she thought Maria would hold out a little longer. But she even had her umbrella with her. Is it over? When Maria turned around and saw that it was the healer Glands, she said, Is that you? The physician said their princess was rescued by the mad Marquis of Nirad. Had she really heard rumors about the Marquis of Eli? She heard that the princess used magic, but she doesn't know if the head maid saw that magic. Maria asked why she cared. The healer replied that she had heard that there were rats in their mansion, and those rats stole something. Sometimes to think that small rats are unlikely to steal something big and valuable. Did you even know that some people keep rats as pets? They say that if the owners are wise, they are well trained, don't eat garbage, and don't steal other people's stuff. The healer pointed her finger at the maid Cara. So what's that poor rat that has lost its master and is forced to steal? The healer was referring to the head maid Maria. Maria turned around, grabbing her umbrella and pointing it at the healer. She said the girl was being too impertinent. Maria replied, After all, they are all the toys of their masters. Did the healer really think the Duke would treat her any differently? She knows that the doctor abused Graham this morning, that she injected him with something and then he got sick and died. Maria, pointing her finger upwards, said that if word of this got out, she would be thrown out on the street. When the new heir becomes head, right? The healer laughed and said, then she should take another look at the situation. As it is from the outside, the older maid accuses the younger maid. She assumes she is trying to chase her away so as not to give up her place. The healer is very curious about how the head maid of the Manor's mansion became a special servant for the illegitimate son living in the attic. Since she revealed her secret, let me reveal something to the healer as well. She knows, doesn't she? The healer remembered Letitia saying that she thought it was a peculiarity in healer Glands. The healer asked, Does she know how to respect her subordinates, Maria? So God has not yet turned away from her. The head maid Maria asked, Why? The healer said there was no need to resort to such dirty tricks, for she chooses her own people. A little memory from a few years ago. Manor's mansion. It is fine snow for winter. All the trees are covered with white hoarfrost. Frosty. A carriage came to the entrance of the palace. The maids and servants and the maid Maria were waiting for it. When the delivery truck pulled up, the coachman stood up and said, These are the ingredients you requested for this month. Ask that they be checked. Maria took the slip of paper and began to read. She said, Hold on. She's going to study it now to make sure it's right. Suddenly Maria heard someone sobbing from the wagon. Someone was crying. She looked at her, and I saw a child sitting in the cart, covered with some kind of cloth, incomprehensible, without a hat. The child was sitting, shaking and crying. Maria asked, What kind of child is this? The coachman said she was alone, so we had to take her along. They say she was trained in some trades at Randall's mansion, so she could be used as a maid. The girl sat there crying from cold and hunger. Cara was a 14-year-old girl when she arrived at Manera Manor. Maria had since tried to teach the girl everything that maids are taught, but unfortunately Cara didn't succeed the first time. Maria looked down on her and thought she was hopeless. She had nothing but bones and character. The butler asked the head maid, "What are they going to do with this child? She doesn't know how to do anything, and doesn't want to learn anything." Cara was in trouble. Just like Letitia, when she wanted to see her mother, she was punished very badly by her grandfather. He would grab her and beat her on the back with a stick. It is said that in general, who gave her the right to walk around the mansion at her own command, and her brother Philip always stood next to her and laughed with it. Letitia screamed, "Grandpa, stop it, she's in a lot of pain. She just wanted to see her mom." The head maid Maria was overseeing all of this. She taught the same technique to her maid Cara, and told her that she thought Cara could help her and become a dedicated maid. Maria also beat Cara herself, as Letitia was beaten by her grandfather. Always said Cara as she thought she'd have somewhere to go if she was suddenly kicked out of the mansion. Who would ever write a letter of recommendation for a stupid maid like her? Maybe the butler or her. One afternoon, a maid handed Cara a tray of food and told her to hurry up and take the food to her mistress. Cara looked at the tray warped, saying, "No," but the maid said, "Hurry up." She did not want to starve her only mistress and shoved the girl in the back. She coughed and cried out, "Ouch!" "Vesna something. I'm an orphan, she's still taking care of the princess," laughed the other maids and servants. "Don't they fit together?" Cara heard all this as she walked up the stairs coming out of the kitchen and thought, "No, she's not like her mistress." Walking into Letitia's room, Cara thought that no, she wasn't that small and pathetic. And we remember how at the very beginning of the story, Letitia burst into her room and shouted, "Mistress, do you know what time it is?" Tearing the blanket off Letitia. Cara thought, every time she had to fight, she didn't want to become a victim in this food chain and have to yell at her mistress. She decided that she would not be as weak as Letitia. Walking down the hallway, Cara thought Letitia would hate her, but she took her side and defended her. She said, "Mistress, thank you for your trust." Letitia replied that it was fine. If she wanted to steal something from her, she would have stolen it long ago and run away. Letitia knows better than anyone that she's not the kind of person who would steal. She was the only person in the mansion that Letitia could confide in. Cara was upset and began to cry after hearing those words. And Letitia understood that this was the second stage of trust. Once the other person obeys her, she needs to reward them accordingly. She finally got the hang of it. A few days later, early morning, there was a knock on the door at Letitia's room. The girl said, "Come in." The door to the room opened, and Ruvian walked in. His eyes were on the floor, so he didn't notice Letitia right away. He looked up, saw it, and asked, "What's going on?" Letitia stood at the window, covered with a white cloth. She looked at Ruvian, whereupon she said, "Lord Ruvian." She salutes him. The guy saw that lady wasn't ready yet, and covering his eyes with his hand said, "Well, it's been raining heavily all week, making it extremely difficult to cross the Rotim Bridge, so she's going to have to leave a little earlier than planned." Letitia replied, "Very well, so be it." Then Lord Ruvian said, thanking her for her understanding, "Princess," and bowed. Said she needed to change. Could he wait for her outside the door for a bit? As soon as he was done, she would follow him right away. The guy became very uncomfortable. He said, "Oh yes, I apologize," and immediately left the room so as not to disturb the princess's packing. Letitia reflected, as she dressed, on the fact that she didn't know what Eli's intentions were. Nor does she know what Lord Ruvian is thinking of her right now. But one thing she knows is that if she succeeds, her father will be proud of her. Also, Lord Reuben thought of Letitia too. After all, he can't hate the princess anymore. When Letitia was ready, she went downstairs to the carriage. As she walked along the road, she reasoned. Ruvian in both his lives he had done her no wrong, so she would make him her subordinate. As they approached the carriage, Letitia said, as he had already heard her father say, that she was asking him to accompany her on her way to the church. Ruvian bowed and said, "Yes, rely on him. He'll handle it and make it all better." Letitia looked at the guy and thought she would remind him that he used to hate her a lot. What was going to happen in this life? It was created by the same question. I wondered if he still hated her, or if the hatred had passed. When Letitia got into the carriage, the coachman told the horses, and they rushed through the woods to the place indicated. The carriage was on its way. The girl thought her plan had been heard. And since the Duke had given her permission to go to church, she would have no trouble. As they drove, Letitia held her magic locket in her hands. She was very nervous, and remembered that there were a couple of other things that could not be obtained by effort and study. She recalled how she used to go to her teacher, and that girl used to tell her why she should labor when she was lucky enough to be born of such a rich father. However, studying requires a lot of effort. Letitia eventually became no longer needed by her father. With great effort, she learned to read ancient languages. But she couldn't do everything. Her father threw her away like garbage. Did the great god take pity on her and give her magic powers? The time flew by quickly. Already the coachman had announced the lady they had arrived at the church. Getting out of the carriage, they were met by the priest of El Monte. The priest said he got word from the Duke. She wants to test her abilities, he asked Letitia. The girl answered yes, the priest. Letitia said that this was her second visit since she was very young. The priest offered to take her to the strength testing room right away so she wouldn't waste time. The priest said that children from noble families come to church to see, even before the age of 5, what their abilities are. So you have some powers then? The girl replied that she had no such powers. The priest replied that he understood. He had prepared everything in advance, but he thought the result would be the same. Rowan and Letitia headed for the entrance, but the priest said that only the princess could enter further, so you would have to wait. The Lord was worried. He said he doesn't know what's inside this room. He's escorting and guarding the princess. The priest said that only specialists could enter the testing room. It wasn't like he had applied. Rowan shouted. He hadn't been warned about this. Letitia turned around and told Rowan to wait for her here. There is a couch in the next room. Rest there and wait for her. What's inside? Questioned the Lord. The priest said that whatever was behind the door was a relic, no danger there. The priest and Letitia went into a special room. It was large and quiet. The priest said that many have taken this test. As long as the relic is not destroyed, nothing dangerous will happen. So don't worry, the girl asked. Has the relic here already been destroyed? The priest said that he had heard that there had been an accident in the magic tower a few years ago. Letitia immediately remembered that the magic tower was what happened when Nirad came to measure his magic power. It seems that his magic power became so great that the uncontrolled magic greatly affected the relic, so it was destroyed. The priest said, "Wait here for a moment. I will ask the examiner if he is ready." Letitia replied that yes, priest. She would wait. Letitia replied to the priest to take her time. She had plenty of time. When the priest had gone, then Letitia said, "Shall we get to the point?" Walking over to a huge stone. It was the Stone of Souls. The girl took hold of her magical medallion. She thought, a coal-black stone that looks like a fragment of the Soul Stone given by Count Winter. He is said to turn white when he interacts with a person with magical powers. And this fabric that moves around the stone like water is called the Rest of the Dead. It is a vast space connecting the entrance to hell and heaven. The soul chosen by the great saint can choose one of two paths: rest and suffering. The gate of heaven that Hildegard keeps is a chance at eternal rest. A black door that erases all memories and returns to the path of reincarnation. Blue flames flowing like water keep two shrines. It's the path everyone wants to take at the end of life. She didn't have that option. Even if she goes to hell, she will not reach the gates of paradise, for there is none. This can't connect hell and heaven. It turns out she's just magical. The girl decided to touch this stone and it began to glow. Suddenly there was a voice in the room. "Wait, princess!" The priest jumped out of the room and shouted, "This stone has an evil spirit, don't touch it!" Letitia interjected how it was a stone with an evil spirit. She said, "I'm sorry, but it doesn't matter." She was risking her life as it was. The girl took and touched the magic stone with her hand. Everything around her began to lighten. The priest rushed over to her to remove her hand. But that was Letitia's plan. When she touched it, everything turned white. Letitia remembered for a moment a conversation with her mother, when she was still very young. "Daughter, let's talk about spirit stones today." "Yes, Mom," the girl replied. "There are two kinds of these stones in the world, one on the upper floor of the central church, and one in the basement of the magic tower. The woman who talks about these stones is Letitia's mother, Anna Maynor. It is said that a soul stone can determine a person's type of strength." The girl asked, "Soulstone?" "Raiden the white wolf, and Parvis the black fox." Little Letitia asked, Raiden and Parvis, how can animals determine a person's spirit? Mother replied, don't worry. If a person has power, they will easily recognize it. Raiden has a soul stone on his forehead, and Parvis has 3 soul stones on his forehead. Little Letitia asked, but how do the magic tower and the church distinguish between the owners of the power? Mother replied, the moment the bearer of power touches the soul stone, the ancient soul stone sleeping in the abyss is awakened by pure white light. Winter, White Wolf, Raiden's primary power, Raphael's 7th throne. The priest shouted, that color his energy flow through back. Letitia touched that stone. Everything around it turned white. A huge stream of energy radiated from this stone. The power bearer shouted to the priest, a very long time before all this happened, somewhere high in the heavens. Nice work. You made the poor soul of the underworld learn what is good and evil. In order not to die in the cold of hell, they stole the eternal flame and shared it with humans. The great Saint Hildegard said that Raphael, you and Eve broke the ban. The Archangel of Judgment, Raphael, said he was in blood debt to his sister, so he would follow her. He will fall into the same abyss his sister fell into and defy the world. Hildegard said no, Raphael, he would not reach the place where Eve had fallen. Ice and fire were originally together. Those who steal the lives of others receive ice punishment that sizzles the soul. Those who bring others to tears end their lives in a terrible judgment, waiting for the blood to boil and destroy the mind. And your soul will be divided into 2 parts. The Archangel of Justice, Eve, will become the Golden King Iblis, and the souls will turn into little animals that will live forever. Letitia woke up on the floor on the rug. She thought she had fainted. Rising up, she thought, her head hurting so badly. What was that? Where did these visions still come from, somehow seeing them in front of her eyes? According to what she had read in the book, Archangel and Eve were the first children of Hildegard. She was condemned and fell for the sins of stealing fire and giving it to people. Raphael, the 7th child, followed Eve and betrayed his mother. Letitia had already learned enough of the temple's history, but she didn't know that the Demon King had become the daughter of a great saint. Was the Book of Hebron really the story of a family quarrel? As Letitia stood up and adjusted her clothes, she heard the priest lying on the floor nearby. He was grunting with fear. Ah! She has destroyed the soul stone and the relic, he began, pointing to the cross, and shouting that an evil spirit lived in her body. Letitia looked at the priest and asked how she could destroy the soul stone if she hadn't done anything yet. But when the girl turned around, she saw that indeed the stone was gone. It was all broken into small pieces and lying on the floor. She remembered how it was said that if one met a power bearer, the relic would be destroyed. The girl thought, Bertha's piece disappeared along with the soul stone. But the important thing was that everything was safe. She thought she should get back as soon as possible. At that moment, a woman's voice boomed out, "Is that it?" At the very top of the tower stood a girl. She looked through her binoculars and said, "If you don't deal with the witnesses, there will be trouble." "All right then. Who is this mysterious girl?" "She's Bertha's spy." "This spy's name is Jean Winter. She is the eldest daughter of Count Winter." The girl has bright pink hair and a marvelous pair of binoculars in her hands. She said that everyone would be surprised that a noble lady made a mess in the hall of the central church. Now she understands why she was put to watch her. Turning back around, she asked if it was correct that she was addressing the rage demon Lilith. Lilith asked why she was silent. "It's because the others are coming here now." Jean peered carefully through the binoculars and said not to worry. She would keep an eye on Eli to make sure he didn't go over to that guy's side, especially since they could still use him. Lilith said, "It's not like that, Jean. It's the first time she's seen that power in a long time. Nostalgia." Lilith said that when the light of the Soul Stone hit the Lady of Manners, she saw memories of the past. She felt a longing. Unfortunately, obsession and fear are prophetic. She remembers it well. Hildegard said that of the great demons, only one will know true love. And all great demons will follow their own path, and they headed for the most vast empire on this continent, to bring glory and honor to one of the people. But now this is where the story comes to an end. If you enjoyed the story and would like to know what the future holds, put your comment below.